The story of a young Italian college student named Giulia Cecchettin profoundly affected the entire country in the fall of 2023 due to its tragic and senseless nature. Giulia was known for her kindness and trust in others. She showed compassion to a young man who had strong feelings for her, fearing that if she rejected him, he might harm himself. Unfortunately, rather than hurting himself, he directed his pain toward others with devastating results. The full scope of the tragedy was later revealed through Giulia's personal journals, which documented her growing discomfort and emotional struggle. In the aftermath, the individual responsible for the tragedy tried to avoid responsibility by claiming that his actions were driven by overwhelming emotions and temporary confusion. However, the investigation consistently uncovered evidence suggesting that his actions were premeditated. Giulia Cecchettin was born on May 5, 2001, in Padua, Italy. She was the middle child in her family, with an older sister named Elena and a younger brother named Davide. Despite their different personalities, Elena being energetic and rebellious, while Giulia was quiet and obedient, the sisters were very close from an early age. Their family was middle class. Gino, Giulia's father, was an engineer at a local company. Her mother, Monica, worked in city administration. They lived in a spacious house and had several vehicles. Both parents were dedicated to their children. They working hard to provide everything they needed to become kind, responsible individuals. From a young age, Giulia was known for her kindness, empathy. She naturally connected with people, always striving to be helpful and considerate. At times, she was excessively gentle, often avoiding conflict even if it meant sacrificing her own interests. Giulia had a wide circle of friends, effortlessly fit in with any group. In school, she consistently achieved top grades, had a strong interest in literature and foreign languages. However, her true passion lay in art classes, where her teachers recognized her talent and encouraged her to pursue it further. As a teenager, Giulia attended an art academy while still in high school, seriously contemplating a career in the arts. However, as graduation neared, her parents urged her to opt for a more practical, stable career. Taking her father's advice, she enrolled at the University of Padua, one of Italy's leading public universities, chose to study biomedical engineering. Always one to avoid conflict, she agreed without protest and committed herself to her studies, even though she lacked genuine interest in the field. She did not envision a long-term career in biomedical engineering. While at university, Giulia met a classmate named Filippo Turetta, who was also in Padua. Filippo came from a humble background and was the only child of his parents, who cared for him deeply. Giulia and Filippo were in the same department. A mutual attraction quickly grew between them. Their relationship started with long conversations, emotional support, and facing challenges together. When Filippo began to struggle with his studies, Giulia helped him catch up and pass his exams. Soon after, he asked her out on their first date. They officially started dating in January 2022, which was Giulia's first serious relationship. Coming from a protected upbringing, she quickly became very infatuated with him. For the first 6 months, they were nearly inseparable, enjoying each other's company and appearing genuinely happy, which led their family and friends to believe in the strength of their bond. Just 2 months into their relationship, Filippo invited Giulia to dinner at his home, where he referred to her as his future wife while introducing her to his parents. A few weeks later, Giulia reciprocated by bringing Filippo to meet her family. Their friends were convinced that Giulia and Filippo would get engaged by the time they graduated. Life took a devastating turn for Giulia's family when her mother, Monica, was diagnosed with a late-stage illness, and the outlook was grim. Monica's health deteriorated quickly, and despite numerous consultations, doctors indicated there was little hope. The next 6 months felt like a waking nightmare for the Cecchettin family. During this challenging period, Filippo tried his best to provide support. He stayed close to Giulia and also spent time with Monica. Giulia truly valued his presence. She was thankful for his kindness and unwavering support. Nevertheless, even though Monica agreed to participate in experimental treatments, she sadly passed away in October 2022 at just 51 years old. Her death created a huge void in the family. For her husband, Gino, the grief was nearly unbearable. He felt emotionally overwhelmed. It was only through the love and support of his children that he found the strength to carry on. Although Filippo continued to be supportive, changes began occurring in Giulia's feelings toward him. Even though they were still together, she started to feel distant and uncertain about their future. She began to consider ending the relationship but was unsure how to address it without causing conflict or upsetting him. She confided in only her two closest friends, people she had known for years and trusted. They were shocked. On the surface, Giulia and Filippo appeared to be the perfect couple, with a happy, harmonious relationship. However, beneath that facade, things were unraveling. Giulia didn't provide specific details but communicated that the relationship had reached a breaking point and ending it seemed inevitable. She didn't want to hurt Filippo, but she could no longer continue living a lie. The true reason behind her decision would only be revealed much later, following her passing. At that time, Giulia was focused on preparing for her final thesis presentation. However, she realized that she didn't want to pursue a career in biomedical engineering. It simply didn't resonate with her. Without mentioning it to many people, she quietly applied to a prestigious international art school that specializes in comic illustration. When she finally confided in her father, she emphasized that she would complete her university degree as she had promised. She intended to graduate and obtain her qualifications as her parents expected, but after that, she wanted to pursue a second degree in something she was passionate about, becoming an illustrator. Gino listened intently and supported her decision. After the loss of his wife, he had a new outlook on life, recognized its brevity and fragility. He encouraged his daughter to follow her own path, make her own choices, and dedicate herself to what truly made her happy. Giulia's conversation with Filippo turned out to be much harder than she had expected. It took place in August 2023, after they had been together for over a year and a half. Giulia found it difficult to express herself, but Filippo seemed to handle the news maturely. He suggested they remain friends and stay in touch, recognizing the connection they had. Since they attended the same university and studied in the same department, they saw each other frequently. However, less than a week after their breakup, Filippo attempted to rekindle their relationship. He invited Giulia to one of their favorite restaurants, a place that once held special memories for them. He asked her to give their relationship another chance, reminding her of their good times together. Giulia, however, remained resolute. She did not want to repeat old mistakes. The evening ended quietly, but an unspoken tension lingered, only becoming stronger with time. Filippo's behavior took a troubling turn. He began contacting Giulia every day, initially expressing his love and pleading for them to get back together. However, this quickly shifted to manipulation and threats. He warned that he might harm himself if they didn't reconcile. Knowing Giulia's compassionate nature, he exploited her empathy, pushing her emotional buttons. Concerned for his well-being due to his unstable nature, Giulia reluctantly agreed to stay in touch. They briefly resumed seeing each other, driven more by worry than love. Giulia hoped this was only temporary and that their connection would eventually fade. However, Filippo's behavior became increasingly alarming. He flooded her with messages, some of which were distressing. In one, he ominously stated that they would either be together forever or their lives would both end. Although this was a clear threat, Giulia chose not to report it and only confided in her closest friend. This intense situation persisted for nearly 2 months. In late October 2023, Giulia realized she could no longer live in fear. She was set to present her thesis in medical engineering on November 16th, and her classes at the International School of Comics were starting in December. Her schedule was now fully packed, leaving no time for emotional drama or unhealthy attachments. Although still anxious about how Filippo would react, she decided to invite him to a quiet cafe they used to visit. She carefully chose her words to avoid any conflict, explaining that they could remain friends but nothing more. Despite her attempt to be respectful, Filippo was deeply disturbed by her decision. He took the news hard, began to call and message her frequently, but Giulia, busy with her thesis, limited him responses to brief notes. It was around this time that Filippo started secretly following her. He soon noticed she was spending time with someone new guy. Their friendship appeared warm and affectionate, suggesting they might become a couple. Filippo struggled to accept this, and a darker plan began to take shape in his mind. On Saturday, November 11, 2023, Giulia dedicated most of her day to her graduation project. At around 5 p.m., she sent the final version to her academic advisor. Earlier that day, about an hour before, her ex-boyfriend Filippo called her, asking if she would join him to shop for shoes for their upcoming graduation ceremony. It was unusual for him to reach out, as he hadn't contacted her at all for about a week. No texts, calls, or visits. Giulia thought that he had finally accepted their breakup and moved on. Wanting to remain on good terms, she agreed to help him with the shopping. They planned for him to pick her up at 6 p.m. Giulia informed her father that she would be home before midnight and hugged him tightly as she left, unaware that it would be the last time he would see her alive. Filippo arrived at the Sacchetin house right on time. Giulia got into the passenger seat, and they drove to the shopping center in Margra. Witnesses later reported seeing them calmly browsing the stores together. They bought a pair of shoes. Chiaretta and Giulia also had dinner together at a McDonald's inside the mall at around 9:02 p.m., with Giulia paying for both meals with her credit card. They then left the building at around 10:30 p.m. At 10:43 p.m., Giulia sent her final message via WhatsApp to her sister Elena, who was in Vienna at the time for college. However, at 10:45 p.m., her messages suddenly stopped, and she never replied again. Shortly after, her phone was turned off. When Giulia didn't come home by midnight, her family started to worry. At first, they tried to remain calm, thinking she might have just lost track of time. However, by 1 a.m., they began to sense that something was very wrong. Giulia never stayed out overnight without letting someone know. Her phone was off, and they couldn't reach Filippo. Her father and older sister went to file a missing person report while her younger brother stayed home in case Giulia returned. They still held on to a small hope that her phone had died or that she had been delayed, but they believed she would have found a way to let them know she was okay. Police were doubtful about the situation. They pointed out that as an adult, Giulia had the right to choose not to return home or inform anyone of her location. Only a few hours had passed since she was last seen, and according to standard procedure, search efforts for missing adults usually do not start until 24 hours after they go missing. What no one knew at that moment was that about 4 hours before her family reported her missing, an alarming incident had already occurred. This detail was initially overlooked in relation to Giulia's disappearance, but it would soon become evident that it was significant. At around 11:15 p.m. on the night Giulia disappeared, local police received a call from a man. While on his balcony smoking a cigarette, he witnessed something alarming. His apartment overlooked a small parking lot across the street, where he heard someone screaming for help. When he looked more closely, he saw a young woman, clearly terrified, escape from a parked car. Moments later, a man exited the same car, chased her down, and forced her back inside while appearing to hit her. He then pushed her into the back seat and quickly drove off, speeding into the night. The witness tried to remember the license plate number, but couldn't see it clearly in the dark and from a distance. He did remember that the car was a black compact vehicle, possibly a Fiat Punto. He quickly called the local authorities to report what he had witnessed, but since he didn't have many identifying details, they had little to work with. Initially, the authorities dismissed his call because they didn't see it as an immediate threat and chose not to respond. However, the man couldn't shake the feeling that what he had seen was more serious than they realized. Believing he had witnessed a crime, he decided to go to the police station in person. At the station, he met a man named Gino, who was there to report his daughter, Giulia, missing. To their surprise, they discovered they lived only a few houses apart. The man's building was near the end of the street, right across from a small parking lot where the unsettling scene had occurred. The black compact car he described looked a lot like the one driven by Filippo. That same evening, Filippo had picked up his former girlfriend in his black Fiat Punto before they went to the shopping center. Investigators reached out to Filippo's parents, who were understandably anxious. They had been calling friends in hopes of hearing from their son, but unfortunately, no one could provide any helpful information to the police. Officers were quickly sent to the parking lot, which was now thought to be the location of a violent incident. To their disappointment, there were no security cameras in the area. However, security video footage from a factory in the nearby town of Fosso shows Filippo brutally beating Giulia. When she tried to escape, Filippo hit her again from behind, then stuffed her bleeding body into the trunk of his black Fiat Punto. When arriving at the scene of the attack, what they uncovered was alarming. On the ground was a large knife, its blade broken near the handle. Nearby were several dark reddish stains. Although the blood wasn't excessive, it indicated that someone had been injured. Forensic experts confirmed that the knife bore Filippo's fingerprints, the blood matched Giulia's DNA. The broken blade and a deep gouge in the pavement. Investigators feared the worst but still hoped that Giulia might be alive and urgently in need of help. Both students' phones had been turned off shortly after the incident. Data indicated that their last known location was that parking lot where the suspected assault and abduction occurred. Law enforcement opened a criminal case against Filippo, charging him with assault and unlawful detention based on the evidence collected. His parents were shocked and firmly believed that their son would never hurt Giulia, claiming he loved her deeply. Detectives started tracking Filippo's movements by examining footage from roadside surveillance cameras. Later that night, a black Fiat Punto was spotted heading towards a lake in the Porton province. The next day, the vehicle was seen in multiple areas. On November 12, a young man who matched Filippo's description bought something at a gas station near the Austrian border. He used a €20 bill that had what looked like dried blood on it. The cashier didn't pay much attention to this detail at the time, but later surveillance footage confirmed that the buyer was indeed Filippo. A disturbing piece of evidence surfaced shortly after. Security video footage from a factory in the nearby town of Fosso shows Filippo brutally beating Giulia. After the assault, he stood over her lifeless body for several minutes before putting her in the trunk of a car. Investigators found pools of blood and clear signs of a struggle at the scene, leaving no doubt that Giulia had likely been killed. However, her remains were still missing, and the suspect's whereabouts were unknown. Filippo was officially declared wanted throughout Europe. Giulia's body was discovered near Lake Barsis in Piancavallo on November 18, 2023 by the Special Dogs Unit of the Civil Protection. The body was found inside a large nylon bag in a cave at 50 meters altitude, within a wooded area that is generally closed during the autumn-winter period for security reasons. The Italian Forensic Services performed an autopsy on December 1, 2023, and reported that Giulia's body had over 20 stab wounds. She had blunt force trauma to her head, and there were clear signs of her wrists being restrained. Additionally, adhesive residue on her face indicated that her mouth had been taped shut. The circumstances of this case suggested a personal motive and an unusual amount of anger. Filippo was found on November 19 in an emergency lane of a motorway near Leipzig after his car had run out of petrol. Authorities arrested him and sent him back to Italy, where the case had caused a national uproar. During his initial questioning, Filippo confessed in detail about the events, but he stated that he was emotionally disoriented at the time and couldn't recall some parts of what happened. He recounted that they had spent a pleasant day shopping at the mall. On their way back, they stopped in a parking lot near Giulia's house. Filippo gave her a stuffed animal as a gift and asked if they could start their relationship over. Giulia reportedly raised her voice, rejected the gift, and got out of the car, which he claimed triggered a sudden outburst of anger. He grabbed a knife and chased after Giulia, injuring her shoulder in the process. She fell to the ground, and when he tried to strike her again, he missed, causing his knife to break when it hit the pavement. Filippo claimed he forced her back into the car, tied her wrists with rope, and covered her mouth with tape before driving around without a specific destination. Eventually, they ended up in an industrial area. According to him, Giulia managed to open the door and escape. He then took out a second knife and pursued her, continuing to attack until she stopped moving. When asked how many times he hit her, Filippo estimated maybe 5 or 7. However, the forensic team found over 20 wounds, and his story of an unplanned outburst was contradicted by the fact that he had arrived at the meeting with 2 knives, rope, tape, tape, and plastic bags, indicating he was prepared. Filippo claimed he planned to take his own life afterward in order to be with Giulia. He even revealed shallow cuts on his wrists, although he confessed he didn't go through with it. He found it easier to end another's life than to end his own. Despite strong evidence implicating him, his family's legal team maintained that he was mentally confused and had memory loss. Their entire defense strategy focused on this idea, aiming for a lighter sentence or a transfer to a psychiatric facility instead of serving time in prison. Giulia's father, in his grief, took a remarkable action. He gave investigators pages from her personal diary and later made some of them public. His goal was to reveal the truth and draw attention to what his daughter had experienced. The diary entries clearly explained why Giulia had decided to end her relationship with Filippo and what was happening out of public view. Although she had loved him, Filippo had become controlling, emotionally manipulative. He monitored her whereabouts, kept track of her phone and social media, forbade her from seeing friends, and expected her to obey his demands at all times. A significant conflict occurred just before the tragedy involving Filippo's insistence on attending a small family birthday party for Giulia's sister, Elena. This event took place shortly after their mother had passed away, and Giulia's family was not in the mood to celebrate. Despite this, Filippo was angry, feeling that he was part of the family and had the right to attend all family gatherings. This disagreement made Giulia reconsider their relationship, and she recognized that she needed to end things for good. However, Filippo began to use emotional manipulation, threatening to harm himself if she left him. Giulia, being compassionate and empathetic, felt guilty about this. Unfortunately, her kindness would eventually lead to devastating consequences. On September 23, 2024, the summary trial of Filippo Turetta began at the Venice court. He is charged with intentional homicide, aggravated by malice, cruelty, brutality, stalking, and improper disposal of a corpse. By the start of the trial, new evidence indicated that the crime had been premeditated. Investigators discovered that Filippo had begun planning the attack about a week prior, conducting extensive online research for isolated locations in the suburbs that he could use to carry out the act and conceal the aftermath. His browsing history confirmed this. During a search of his car, officers found a printed map of the area. Initially, its relevance was unclear, but it later became evident that Filippo had chosen to use a physical map instead of GPS to avoid leaving a digital footprint. He meticulously planned every detail, but he seemed uncertain about what to do afterward. There were weak indications that he might have considered self-harm, but this was not convincing. By the time of his trial, it was clear that Filippo had acted with intent. He abandoned the emotional disorientation defense and made no claims of psychological instability, admitting that his actions were intentional. As expected, Turetta was questioned at the hearing on October 25, where he presented a 40-page memorial in which he detailed his actions. This prompted the court to cancel the hearing scheduled for October 28, as sufficient questioning had already taken place. At the hearing on November 25, 2024, the prosecutor requested a life sentence for Filippo Turetta. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on December 3, 2024, concluding the trial at the first instance. Aggravating circumstances of premeditated murder, kidnapping, and concealment of the body were acknowledged, while charges of stalking and cruelty were dismissed. In addition, Filippo must pay €760,000 in compensation to the Cecchettin family. In his final statement to the court, Filippo stated he would not appeal the verdict, acknowledging it as fair and expressing no intention to contest the outcome. The aggressive behavior in teens isn't something they are born with or inherit. It's shaped by their surroundings, the way they are raised, and the quality of their relationships with adults. This doesn't apply to diagnosed mental health conditions, of course, but it's crucial to remember that every person, no matter their age, needs love, support, care, and understanding. Emotional and physical mistreatment can sometimes push someone to a very dark place, even turning them into someone capable of terrifying actions. At first glance, Hollowell family seemed like an average household. Their co-workers and neighbors couldn't say a bad word about them, but somehow, trouble seemed to follow them. Strange, sometimes downright disturbing things happened around this family. When the mother was found lifeless in their home, attention quickly turned to her sons. As detectives dug deeper into the case, they began to uncover a string of unsettling family secrets, the kind that painted a very different picture of the quiet, seemingly normal life the Hollowell family had appeared to lead. The Hollowell family lived in a small town in Citrus County, Central Florida. They owned a spacious lakefront home in the unincorporated community of Inverness, near a scenic lake. The area was surrounded by lush greenery, fostering a tight-knit, low-crime community where residents knew each other well. The property had been in the family since the mid-1950s, meaning 3 generations had lived under that same roof. It's worth noting that only about 15 homes sat along that lake, and the residents had lived side by side for many years. This created a tight-knit, close community where everyone knew each other well, crime was virtually non-existent, and strangers were a rare sight. The area was surrounded by lush greenery, making it feel almost like a hidden paradise. In 1965, after many years of unsuccessful attempts to become parents, the Hollowell couple made the decision to adopt a baby girl whose biological parents had given up their rights. She was just 3 months old when they brought her home and gave her the name Denise. From that moment on, she became the center of their universe. She was raised in an environment full of love and care, received a strong education. She had the freedom to pursue her biggest passion, extreme sports. At the age of 20, still a college student, Denise got married for the first time to a fellow student named Richard. The two shared a love for skydiving. In fact, on their wedding day, they did a group jump. During freefall, Denise and Richard exchanged rings midair, but the excitement of their adventurous lifestyle couldn't hold their relationship together. Like many young couples, they simply weren't ready for the realities of married life. They divorced 2 years after their wedding and eventually lost all contact with each other. In 1998, at age 33, Denise got married for the second time. This time her partner was Benjamin, who was nearly a decade older. They hoped to start a family, but Denise was diagnosed with health complications that made pregnancy impossible. Rather than give up on becoming parents, they took a less traditional route. In 2006, the then 41-year-old Denise and 51-year-old Benjamin adopted a boy named Carlos. He had just turned 4, was originally from Guatemala. A year later, they adopted another boy, Angel, from Honduras. This was another complicated, expensive process that demanded a lot from them, both emotionally and financially. Despite now having 2 sons, Denise and Benjamin's marriage continued to strain. In 2012, they made the decision to divorce. After the divorce, the boys remained with Denise, while Benjamin moved to another state. He never stayed in touch and showed no further interest in the boys' lives. By the time Denise's adoptive parents passed away, she inherited a lakefront home in Inverness, Citrus County, and moved there with her sons. She worked as a special education teacher in Marion County, a modest job that didn't bring in much money, but it seemed to be enough to get by. People who knew her described her as educated, intelligent, and non-confrontational. She was respected at work, and neighbors had nothing negative to say about her. Raising 2 adopted sons on her own is incredibly difficult for Denise. Without a father figure in the picture, Carlos and Angel began to spiral. Denise struggled to keep them in line. Angel, in particular, caused the most concern. Even in elementary school, he refused to follow rules or listen to authority. He often had outbursts and episodes of intense aggression. This wasn't typical mischief or rebellion. Angel would lash out at other students. His behavior was sometimes so extreme that it posed a real danger to both himself and others. Carlos had his own issues, though his behavior was less overt. He was more withdrawn and didn't pick fights openly, but if he sensed a confrontation coming, he wouldn't hesitate to throw the first punch. Carlos struggled to make connections with peers and had very few friends, but he found some solace in athletic activities. The brothers never got along. Despite growing up in the same home for years, they didn't bond. In fact, they were openly hostile toward each other. Their fights were brutal and frequent. It was clear they harbored deep resentment. Still, Denise didn't seem to view this as a serious problem. She never sought outside help or involved any professionals. By the time Angel was around 9 or 10 years old, things had taken a turn for the worse. He began skipping school regularly, and teachers reported repeated incidents of aggression. He also started stealing. Around the same time, he ran away from home for the first time, disappearing for several days before returning. After that, it became a pattern. He would vanish for days at a time and stopped attending school altogether. In September 2015, officials from Child Welfare Services paid a visit to the Hollowell residence following ongoing complaints from teachers about Angel's behavior and his repeated disappearances. Their goal was to check on the home environment and speak with the family directly, but what they found was unsettling. Denise was home with the boys and clearly wasn't expecting any visitors. Still, she allowed the officer and the child protection worker inside, as she had no legal reason to deny them. One of the first things that stood out was the condition of the windows. The lower floor windows were partially covered from the inside with cardboard, making it impossible to see what was going on inside from the outside. Inside the house where Denise lived with her 2 sons, something felt off from the very beginning. There were no signs of typical hobbies or pastimes one might expect: no toys, no bikes, no rollerblades. The place was almost barren, with only the most basic furniture, all of it left over from her late parents. The kitchen had an old refrigerator and an old washing machine. Denise had a bed in her own room, but her sons were sleeping on inflatable mattresses tossed directly onto the floor. The most shocking discovery, however, came when officials inspected Angel's room. It didn't resemble a typical bedroom at all. It looked more like solitary confinement. The heavy wooden door had not only a basic turn lock on the inside but also a large metal bolt installed on the outside. There was a small hatch built into the door, which could be locked as well, apparently used to pass food and water inside without opening the door completely. The room was dimly lit. The windows had been fully covered with cardboard, blocking out all natural light. In one corner, Angel sat quietly on a worn-out mattress, and in the opposite corner stood a foul-smelling plastic bucket about 1/3 full of human waste. Angel, however, wasn't scared. He seemed angry. Denise and her 2 sons were immediately taken to the local police station. A child psychologist spoke with the boys while Denise was questioned about the disturbing situation at home. She explained that locking Angel in the room was something she did for safety reasons, to prevent the brothers from fighting and to keep the younger one from running away again. Her explanation didn't sit well with the officers, especially once Angel began to describe his side of the story. He claimed that Carlos frequently hit him, humiliated him, and even threatened to end his life. Denise, according to Angel, never stepped in or defended him. Feeling unsafe, he had tried running away several times. After each escape, Denise began locking him in the room, sometimes for days at a time. He said he had no access to a real bathroom and was given only a plastic bucket to relieve himself. Food and water were passed through the small window in the door, which otherwise stayed locked. Following this testimony, Denise was placed under arrest. Authorities decided to temporarily place both boys in protective care while searching for new adoptive families. A judge was expected to determine what would happen next. But then something unexpected happened. Carlos began defending his adoptive mother. According to Carlos, his younger brother posed a serious risk not only to himself but to everyone around him. No one seemed capable of managing Angel's behavior, and their mom was simply doing what she could to keep everyone safe. Carlos shared that at one point, Angel had brought a knife to school and came dangerously close to harming a classmate. Thankfully, no one was hurt. His account was later confirmed by school staff. Carlos continued to defend his adoptive mother, passionately insisting he wanted to go back home and live with her just like before. During every hearing, he stood by Denise and pleaded with the court not to strip her of her parental rights. Other witnesses, including relatives and neighbors, couldn't offer much insight. They all described the Hollowells as a decent family, considered Denise a caring and responsible mother. Eventually, the case seemed to lean in her favor. Denise didn't appear to be guilty of any wrongdoing. It looked more like she was simply overwhelmed and unable to cope with her younger son's deeply troubling behavior. Angel was eventually placed in a psychiatric facility, then transferred to a group home for high-risk youths, finally placed with a new adoptive family. Denise was cleared of all accusations and reinstated as Carlos's legal guardian. As he had hoped, Carlos returned to the lake house and resumed what seemed like a normal life. On the evening of July 13, 2019, around 6 p.m., a panicked teenager called Citrus County Emergency Services, reporting that his mother had been attacked. The 17-year-old was distraught, pleading for officers and paramedics to arrive quickly. Carlos waited for them at the end of the driveway. He led responders into his mother's bedroom, and what they saw was horrifying. Denise was lying on her side on the bed. Lodged in the back of her head was an axe. Blood had soaked through the pillow, creating a massive red stain. When the first responders arrived, she was still showing faint signs of life. However, despite their efforts, she passed away en route to the hospital. Carlos was the only witness to the incident and provided a story that raised questions. He claimed that earlier that day, he and his mom had attended a relative's funeral in a neighboring town, followed by a memorial meal. They returned home around 4:30 p.m., both exhausted, and decided to lie down for a rest. Carlos said he quickly fell asleep. About an hour later, around 6 p.m., he woke up to strange noises and the sound of the dogs barking. Looking out the window, he noticed that the gate to the dog run was open and that their dogs were running loose in the yard. Concerned, he went to check on his mom. That's when he discovered the horrifying scene. He immediately contacted emergency services, hoping she could still be helped. When investigators asked Carlos who might have had a reason to hurt his mother, he didn't hesitate to name Angel. According to him, only his younger brother harbored enough resentment toward Denise to actually want to harm her. Carlos also admitted that he believed Angel was capable of hurting him too, but for some unknown reason, Angel didn't do that. He added that he no longer felt safe and feared what might happen next. After speaking with Carlos, authorities moved quickly to locate and question Angel, who was now considered the primary suspect. However, this proved to be more difficult than expected. No one seemed to know where Angel was. Since being removed from the Hollowell household by Child Welfare Services, Angel had cycled through several foster homes but never managed to settle anywhere. He struggled with social interaction, couldn't get along with others, displayed ongoing aggression, and frequently ran away. About a year before the incident, Angel had run away from yet another foster home, and this time he completely vanished. His whereabouts remained unknown, and now investigators feared he might have returned to carry out an act of revenge against Denise, with whom he had always had a difficult and volatile relationship. There were several troubling details at the scene that seemed to support that theory. There were no signs of forced entry. The weapon used in the attack, an axe, was taken from the backyard. Nothing was stolen from the house. In fact, cash and a debit card were still sitting untouched on the nightstand next to Denise. This indicated that the motive wasn't robbery. Whoever did this had a personal reason, and it looked like Denise had been deliberately targeted. Authorities canvassed the neighborhood in Inverness, Citrus County, hoping for leads, but most neighbors had little to offer. No one could say anything negative about the Hollowell family. In fact, people described Denise as calm, well-spoken, and thoughtful. Although she and the boys hadn't lived there long, her late parents had been familiar faces in the community. However, some residents began to recall strange and troubling events that started shortly after Denise and her sons moved into house. Local pets had begun disappearing, first a few cats, then dogs. Shortly after the initial reports of missing pets, the situation in the area worsened. Residents started to report the disappearance of young livestock, such as baby goats and other small animals. When these animals were eventually found, the conditions were shocking. Many showed signs of what appeared to be intentional harm, deep cuts, torn wounds, and, in some cases, severe injuries that disfigured them. Their eyes were damaged, indicating deliberate cruelty. Several locals informed law enforcement about these incidents, but the cases did not seem to be a priority. The officers appeared to be focused on more urgent matters than investigating animal cruelty and missing pets. Interestingly, none of the residents connected these horrific acts to the Hollowell family. Denise and her sons had even assisted in searching for some of the missing pets. They regularly spoke with their neighbors, though she wasn't particularly close to anyone and rarely had visitors at her home. Many people were unaware of what was happening behind the doors. Most didn't know that Angel had been moved to another adoptive family. They assumed he had gone to live with relatives in town, just like Carlos had during an earlier period. Investigators became interested in Carlos's past, particularly the time he spent living with relatives. They decided to inquire further to understand the reasons behind this situation. It turned out that Carlos had faced significant behavioral issues. At the age of 14, he began drinking alcohol and trying different additives. His behavior became unpredictable and aggressive, causing him to lash out at his mother and younger brother. In response, Denise sought professional help, leading to Carlos being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and signs of obsessive-compulsive tendencies. His symptoms worsened due to his alcohol and addictive use. He briefly stayed in a treatment facility but was discharged with a prescription for medication, which he refused to take and ultimately discarded. At 16, Carlos stopped going to school but kept this a secret from his mother for some time. Each morning, he pretended to leave for class. When Denise eventually found out, it led to a serious confrontation, especially after Carlos took a dangerous mix of painkillers and alcohol, which almost cost him his life. Denise called emergency services just in time, and the medical staff were able to stabilize him. Following this frightening experience, a relative named Stephanie offered her support. Her own son had faced similar challenges, including bipolar disorder and behavioral issues during his teenage years. Stephanie had researched these topics extensively and tried various therapeutic methods at home. Over time, her son seemed to grow past his difficult phase. He matured, pursued an education, and eventually moved to another city for a more stable life. Stephanie firmly believed that her approach, which she considered her own form of therapy, was the key to her son's recovery. Although she had no formal training, relied on online resources and books, she felt confident in her methods. She proposed that Carlos temporarily move into her home for what she called treatment. Carlos lived at Stephanie's house for about 6 months, during which Denise visited him regularly. Stephanie held what she called therapy sessions and suggested recording them for later review. These recordings were kept at her home and became crucial evidence after a tragedy involving Denise. The tapes revealed a troubling dynamic between Denise and Carlos. Instead of support, Denise frequently blamed Carlos for her life's difficulties. She expressed regret about adopting him, called him names, and made him feel unwanted, saying he would never be loved. During this time, Denise was also struggling financially. She lost her teaching job and was getting by with unstable side jobs. She pressured Carlos to find work to help pay for household expenses. At one point, she stopped buying him clothes, claiming she couldn't afford it, and eventually refused to feed him, telling him he had to buy his own food. The situation worsened as Denise became verbally abusive, cruelly referencing Carlos's adoption. She would say things like they had rescued him from the streets and that without her, he would be suffering from hunger or illness in a bad neighborhood. She made offensive, reminded him of the expenses involved in his adoption, and even demanded that he repay those costs. About a month before the tragedy, Carlos expressed a wish to return to live with his adoptive mother. Following Stephanie's advice, he even created a list of reasons for wanting to move back, with one of his main goals being to mend his relationship with Denise. Denise supported his ambition to attend college, believing education was essential for his future, and she promised to help with tuition costs if possible. Stephanie also suggested that Denise set up surveillance cameras in several rooms of the house, particularly in areas where she and Carlos spent time together, so she could keep an eye on his behavior remotely. Although the idea felt odd to Denise, she agreed, partly out of caution. It was evident she didn't completely trust Carlos and worried he might act out in anger. Strangely, those cameras and Denise's phone vanished from the house. The surveillance system had been turned off the day before the incident. Carlos insisted he wasn't involved and claimed that Denise managed everything regarding the cameras. As for the phone, he stated he hadn't seen it and had no idea where it could be. A week before the tragedy, Denise and Carlos had a serious argument that became physical. A neighbor saw what happened and stepped in, telling them he would call the police if it occurred again. After Denise's death, Carlos became a person of interest, but there wasn't enough solid evidence to charge him at that time. The authorities questioned him but let him go. Meanwhile, the main suspect was still his missing brother, Angel. The day after the incident, a local teenager, who was a neighbor and friend of Carlos, came to express his condolences. They were about the same age and had a casual friendship, but Carlos didn't seem upset. Instead, he told his friend that he just needed to make it through the next 3 weeks until he turned 18. After that, he planned to sell the so-called House of Horrors and leave the area for good. His friend was surprised by both Carlos's words and the eerily calm way he spoke. The friend shared this conversation with his parents, who then contacted the police, leading to Carlos being questioned again. However, he did not provide any new information. In response, investigators decided to bring in a dive team to search the lake behind the Hollowell property, suspecting that the missing cameras and Denise's phone might have been discarded there. The lake was not very large, and the team quickly found the items. Unfortunately, the cameras were of no use. They had been turned off before the incident and recorded no footage. However, the phone provided crucial information. Data showed that it had been powered down, likely after entering the water, just 10 minutes before Carlos called emergency services. This helped investigators accurately determine the approximate time of the attack. Carlos claimed he had been asleep at the time of the incident and only woke up when he heard dogs barking outside. However, the analysis of his phone usage suggested otherwise, showing that his phone had been active just before Denise was attacked. A neighbor also reported seeing Carlos outside around 5:30 p.m., heading toward the backyard shed. When presented with this evidence, including the neighbor's statement, Carlos became evasive and inconsistent in his answers. Eventually, he admitted he had gone outside during that time, stating he was splitting firewood behind the house to relieve stress after arguing with his mother. He mentioned going back inside for a glass of water, sitting in the kitchen for about 5 minutes, and then hearing the dogs barking. When he stepped outside, he didn't see anyone who might have let the dogs out. Assuming it was his mother, he went to her bedroom and found her lying on the bed with an axe in the back of her head. Carlos maintained his innocence. His lawyer developed a defense based on this claim. They argue that there was no physical evidence linking Carlos to the crime, and since Angel was still missing, so investigators had to keep Carlos as a potential suspect. A significant breakthrough in the case occurred in early 2020 when authorities located Angel. He had been living in another state in a juvenile detention facility after being arrested for a burglary. Because he used a false identity, it took time to identify him correctly. Records indicated that Angel was already in custody at the time of the crime, which meant he could not have been involved in Denise's case. He was brought back to Florida to testify in court. On the witness stand, Angel described his brother as a source of torment for both him and their adoptive mother. He accused Carlos of being responsible for the troubling incidents of animal cruelty in their neighborhood. Faced with overwhelming evidence and unable to shift the blame, Carlos ultimately accepted a plea deal and confessed to the crime. However, when asked about his motive, he had difficulty providing a clear explanation. He mentioned his dislike for his mother, his desire to sell the house, and a wish to escape. They were just thoughts that came to him while chopping firewood. This was framed rather as a spontaneous reaction. Carlos even claimed to have had a brief mental breakdown. However, the fact that the surveillance cameras were turned off in advance and later removed suggested a level of planning and preparation. In July 9, 2021, Carlos was convicted of intentionally killing Denise Hollowell and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Because he was a minor at the time of the crime, the court allowed him to seek a review of his sentence in 2044. On the evening of May 28, 2023, 29-year-old Julia Tramontano vanished without a trace. 7 months pregnant, she stopped responding to calls and messages from loved ones. The first person to report her disappearance was the man she lived with, Alexander Impagnatiello. He insisted that when he returned home from work, he found the apartment empty and had no idea where his partner could have gone. From the very beginning, there were too many unusual details in this case. Julia had left behind most of her personal belongings, and her plans for the near future gave no indication that she intended to disappear. As investigators began piecing together her last known activities, they uncovered even more troubling facts. The night before she went missing, Julia had sent messages to her mother, Loredana Femiano, and a close friend, revealing that she had had a serious argument with Alexander. She was deeply upset and wrote that the situation was causing her a great deal of distress. But the most important question remained unanswered: what really happened that fateful evening? If Julia had truly left the house on her own, why had no one seen her since? In the days that followed, investigators would begin unraveling a web of deception that would lead to a grim truth. Julia was born on May 2, 1994, in a small town in the province of Naples. She grew up in a close-knit family where support and warmth were always present. Her parents encouraged independence and self-confidence from an early age. While they embraced modern views, family traditions remained a cornerstone of their lives, and home was always a place she could return to for guidance, comfort. Julia attended a local school, excelling in the humanities. She was drawn to real estate, fascinated by architecture, investment opportunities, and the idea of becoming a successful real estate agent. After high school, she pursued a degree in the field, quickly mastering the profession thanks to her analytical mindset and strong communication skills. By the age of 25, she had built a solid reputation in the industry, but for Julia, this wasn't enough. She dreamed of life in a big city filled with opportunities. By the time she turned 26, her career in her hometown had reached a plateau. Working at a real estate agency, she realized the local market had its limitations. Inspired by her friends' stories, she decided to move to Senego, a suburb of Milan, where she believed would offer her a new chapter filled with potential. By the end of 2018, her decision was final. Senego symbolized independence, new connections, and the career growth she longed for. The transition happened quickly. Packing her belongings and saying goodbye to her loved ones, she set off for the city that she hoped would become her new home. After moving to Senego, Julia immediately immersed herself in work. The city's real estate market was fast-paced, competitive, required confidence and persistence. She adapted quickly, building connections, attending networking events, and closing deals. Her new life was exciting, but amid her busy schedule, she found herself longing for something more: personal happiness. It was during this time that she met Alexander. Their paths crossed at a Milan bar where her colleagues had invited her to celebrate a successful deal. Alexander worked as a bartender at a high-end lounge inside a five-star hotel. A year older than Julia, he was charming, outgoing, and had a natural ability to connect with people. His confidence and charisma drew her in. With him, she felt like she could relax, momentarily escape the pressures of work, and simply enjoy the present. The first few weeks of their relationship felt effortless. They spent evenings dining at restaurants, strolling through the city at night, and talking about the future. Alexander shared that he had a son from a previous relationship but assured her that his past was behind him and that he was now looking for stability. Julia sincerely hoped that her move to Senego would bring not only career growth but also personal fulfillment. She was convinced that Alexander was the person she was meant to build a future with. Julia believed she had finally met someone with whom she could build a lasting relationship. Their romance moved quickly, and within a few months, they decided to move in together. She had no idea what secrets he was hiding or how much her decision would change the course of her life. Tensions in Julia's relationship with Alexander were growing. She felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint the issue. As time went on, the discomfort increased, while Alexander continued to act as if everything was normal. By the end of 2022, Julia noticed changes in her body: constant fatigue, strange cravings, and a missed period led her to suspect that something was different. Not wanting to wait any longer, she bought a pregnancy test. She then realized she was pregnant. This news brought mixed feelings. She had always wanted a family, but the past few months with Alexander had been challenging. Nonetheless, she knew she needed to tell him in person. Nervously, Julia chose the right moment to share the news. She had thought about various possible reactions: surprise, joy, maybe even fear, but Alexander's expression was unreadable. After a few seconds of silence, he finally asked one question: "Are you sure?" Julia felt the chilling distance in his demeanor. He showed no curiosity and asked no questions about how far along she was or how she was feeling. His indifference was impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, he never brought up the topic again. No discussions about the future, no interest in upcoming doctor's visits. Julia felt abandoned but held on to hope that in time he would come to terms with the situation. The new year began, but Alexander's attitude remained unchanged. More and more, Julia found herself spending evenings alone, contemplating her future. She kept working, trying to focus on other things, but an uneasy feeling grew inside her. Meanwhile, Alexander's double life took an unexpected turn. In early 2023, he learned that his other partner, Allegra Syria, was also expecting. The news caught him completely off guard. Just like Julia, Allegra had no idea that another woman was in her life. She truly believed she and Alexander were in a committed relationship. Unlike Julia, however, Allegra was unsure whether she wanted to continue the pregnancy. Alexander convinced Allegra that having a child wasn't the right decision at that moment. He assured her that he would support whatever choice she made, but strongly implied that ending the pregnancy would be for the best. Allegra hesitated for a long time but eventually agreed. Alexander accompanied her to the medical procedure, ensuring that this chapter was closed. He hoped that with Allegra's pregnancy no longer an issue, he could now focus on dealing with what he saw as his bigger problem: Julia's decision to have the baby. Unlike Allegra, Julia was determined to continue her pregnancy. Despite his emotional distance, Alexander repeatedly tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Julia refused to change her mind. For her, this was a conscious and personal decision. She knew that her relationship with Alexander was falling apart, but she was prepared to raise the baby on her own. What she didn't realize was that this choice would become a turning point in her life. After Julia refused to terminate the pregnancy, Alexander realized he was losing control of the situation. Her firm decision disrupted his plans and forced him to look for another way to free himself from what he saw as a problem. He had begun systematically researching poisons. He scoured the internet for methods to cause harm without raising suspicion, analyzing which substances were both effective and difficult to detect. His research covered chemical compounds found in household products, plant-based toxins, and even highly dangerous substances like cyanide. However, most of the options he found were either too difficult to obtain or left clear traces in the body. Eventually, he settled on rodenticides, products designed to eliminate rodents. These were widely available over the counter and wouldn't raise any red flags. He also found information suggesting that certain types worked slowly, causing internal bleeding, weakness, and anemia symptoms that could easily be mistaken for pregnancy complications. After, Alexander began putting his plan into action. He started adding small amounts of the toxic substance to Julia's food and drinks, hoping that her health would gradually decline. Within weeks, she began experiencing unusual symptoms: constant exhaustion, dizziness, nausea, and sharp abdominal pain. Julia confided in her friends about how unwell she felt but assumed it was just part of the pregnancy. She had no idea that something much more sinister was happening. Alexander closely monitored her condition, expecting the effects to intensify, but the poison wasn't working as quickly as he had hoped. Frustrated, he continued to try increasing its dosage, but the results were still disappointing. Julia still felt sick, but her body was fighting back, and the pregnancy was progressing. This infuriated Alexander. His original plan had failed, and now he was forced to consider another way out. Alexander was accustomed to being in control of situations. He skillfully crafted his lies, knowing exactly what to say to persuade each woman to accept his version of reality. Julia thought he was merely going through a tough time and believed he would eventually come to terms with the pregnancy. Allegra, meanwhile, was convinced that his past relationship had ended long ago. But one misstep shattered his carefully maintained facade. The first sign of trouble for Allegra was how uncomfortable Alexander became whenever his past was mentioned. He avoided talking about his life before they met, never shared his social media accounts, and didn't mention his ex. Initially, this didn't seem suspicious, but over time, the inconsistencies began to accumulate. The turning point occurred when she accidentally discovered recent photos on his phone, images of him with Julia. Their expressions and body language indicated that their relationship was still very much alive. Allegra didn't want to leap to conclusions, so she started observing him more closely and taking mental notes. He frequently left in the evenings, saying he was working late, but his co-workers at the hotel disclosed that he had actually clocked out early. At times, he wouldn't answer his phone, only to later offer excuses that didn't quite make sense. When Allegra confronted Alexander about the photos, he responded immediately. He accused Julia of being unable to accept their breakup and spreading the pictures to make him feel guilty. Allegra wanted to trust his explanation, but it felt off to her. As she asked more questions, Alexander's answers became less convincing. Realizing he was losing control, he quickly changed his story. He claimed that Julia not only refused to move on but had also faked her pregnancy to try to keep him. In a last-ditch effort to support his lie, Alexander even created a fake DNA test. He modified a file he found online and presented it as evidence that he was not the child's father. Although Allegra initially believed him, her doubts persisted. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she knew. A few days later, Allegra decided to investigate for herself. While Alexander was sleeping, she took his phone, found Julia's number, and sent her a message. Julia replied almost immediately, and her tone wasn't one of revenge, rather, she was also seeking answers. The next day, Allegra proposed they meet in person. Both women realized that this conversation had the potential to change everything. On May 27, 2023, they agreed to meet at Armani Hotel where Allegra worked, feeling a mix of tension and determination. Allegra was still unaware of the full extent of Alexander's betrayal, while Julia was shocked to learn that the man she had envisioned a future with was living a double life. Their meeting began cautiously. Allegra spoke first, revealing what she had uncovered. She explained how Alexander had convinced her that his past relationship was completely over, and she mentioned the supposed DNA test that indicated the baby wasn't his. Julia listened intently. Once Allegra finished, Julia calmly clarified that the test was fake. She had never asked for a test, and the timeline of her pregnancy corresponded perfectly with their relationship. More importantly, she disclosed that she and Alexander were still living together, and he had never given her any indication that their relationship was ending. As the minutes passed, Allegra began to see the reality of the situation. She realized she had been deceived from the beginning. Her entire view of their relationship changed, and for the first time, she felt certain about the truth. Although she was hurt and disappointed, she held no resentment toward Julia. It became painfully clear that both women had fallen victim to the same web of lies. Their conversation lasted more than an hour as them shared details, gradually uncovering the full extent of Alexander's deceit. Eventually, they moved from seeing each other as rivals to feeling connected. In that moment, Julia made a decisive choice. She was finished with Alexander. Her future was for herself and her child. Alexander had no role in it now. Upon returning home, Julia confronted Alexander right away, revealing that she knew everything and that their relationship was over. He initially denied everything and then became defensive, accusing her of intruding into his private matters. However, Julia disregarded his excuses, firmly stated that she was leaving for Naples and didn't want any further contact with him. That evening, she texted her mother and sister to explain her decision. They fully supported her and offered assistance in any way they could. Julia reassured them, saying she needed to handle a few things in Milan first but would be home in a few days. After their conversation, Alexander realized he had lost control. Everything he had concealed was now revealed. Julia knew the truth about his double life, his lies, and his manipulation. She no longer trusted him or listened to his words. She had made a firm decision to leave him. That day, the tension between them reached. Julia ignored all of Alexander's attempts to engage her. She focused solely on packing her belongings, showing no emotion. Her silence only intensified his frustration. Alexander pleaded with her, insisting she was making a mistake, declaring his love, and urging her to reconsider, but Julia remained silent. His anger escalated as he raised his voice in desperation, seeking any reaction from her. When he realized she had made up her mind, a wave of uncontrollable rage consumed him. In a moment of blind fury, he grabbed a knife from the counter and attacked. Julia had no opportunity to defend herself. The assault was swift and precise. But for Alexander, it was not enough to stop there. Driven by panic and fear of being exposed, he continued his assault, losing all sense of restraint. Realizing he needed to eliminate the evidence, he dragged her to the bathroom. He poured alcohol over her and set her on fire, hoping the flames would destroy any evidence. However, the fire only caused burns and did not fully consume. Frantically, he grabbed rags, cleaning supplies, scrubbing the blood from the floor, walls, and furniture. Despite his efforts, the stains persisted. The apartment still resembled a crime scene. He understood that he couldn't completely erase what had happened, but he believed he could find a way to avoid being held responsible. Having failed to destroy the evidence through fire, he needed a new strategy. His first step was to stage her disappearance, making it seem like Julia had left on her own. He took her phone, began messaging her family and friends. Knowing they would be concerned if she suddenly went missing, he crafted messages to imply she had chosen to leave. He sent a brief, vague text to her mother, stating that she needed some time alone. Then, he messaged one of her friends, claiming that she had left but wasn't ready to discuss her whereabouts. He intended to buy himself some time to make it appear that Julia had simply vanished. However, his plan didn't stop there. He was aware that someone would eventually alert the authorities, so, on May 28, 2023, he went to the police and reported Julia missing. He claimed that they had an argument and she left the house, never to return. His story was straightforward. That morning he had gone to work, and when he came back, she was gone. He's saying that her personal belongings, including her passport and money, were missing, implying she had left town voluntarily. Investigators paid close attention, but right from the beginning, something felt off. His behavior raised suspicion. He spoke too confidently, almost as if he already knew what questions the officers would ask. In contrast to Julia's family and friends, who were frantic, desperate for information, he remained unsettlingly calm. While the police organized a search, Alexander concentrated on concealing the evidence. He wrapped the body in a plastic bag and moved them to the garage. Over the next few days, he relocated the body several times, first hiding them in the basement of their building, then bringing them back to the garage. He was trying to find a way to get rid of them for good, but the longer he waited, the more mistakes he made. Investigators started examining his statements closely, interviewing neighbors, and searching for inconsistencies. He thought he was still in control, but law enforcement was closing in. After Alexander reported Julia missing, the police followed their standard procedures for such cases. The first significant clue came when forensic specialists found traces of blood in his car. Despite his attempts to clean it, modern technology allowed investigators to identify the biological evidence, which was confirmed to belong to Julia. The second piece of evidence was uncovered in the common areas of their apartment building. Faint reddish stains on the stairs and in the hallway initially appeared to be dust or spilled liquid. However, chemical testing revealed they were traces of partially cleaned blood. Investigators noted Alexander's strange behavior. Unlike most people whose loved ones disappear, he showed little genuine concern. He did not reach out to Julia's family for help in finding her, nor did he actively participate in spreading information about her disappearance. He only completed the formal steps to report her missing, which raised further suspicions. A major breakthrough in the case occurred when detectives analyzed his electronic devices. They confiscated his phone, computer, and tablet, revealing alarming findings. First, they discovered a search history that dated back several months before the crime. He had been researching poisons, learning about the effects of various toxins, and reading articles on how to discreetly harm someone. Some searches even questioned why certain toxic substances might fail to work. Another crucial piece of evidence was the forged DNA test he had shown Algra. Forensic analysis confirmed that the document had been tampered with and that it was downloaded from a website that allowed users to edit medical records. As more evidence accumulated, Alexander's story began to unravel. Investigators increased their pressure, systematically highlighting inconsistencies in his account. Initially, he maintained his innocence, claiming he knew nothing about it. However, with each interrogation, the police presented undeniable facts. They showed him photographs of blood stains, confronted him with his search history. They brought in witnesses who reported hearing loud noises and shouting from Alexander's apartment. A significant breakthrough in the investigation happened when authorities examined Alexander's actions after Julia went missing. Surveillance cameras showed him making several trips to the garage, where he carried plastic bags inside and later came out empty-handed. Eventually, he confessed and revealed where he had hidden her body. On June 1, 2023, police found Julia's remains in a dense area near Sago. Forensic examination indicated that someone had tried to burn the body, but the attempt was not completed. Despite his efforts to conceal the truth, experts were able to determine how she died and gather conclusive evidence linking him to the crime. The tragic death of Giulia Tramontano shocked people all over Italy, a country where gender-based violence is a serious issue. After Alexander was arrested, protests began nationwide. Women filled the streets, carrying signs and demanding stricter punishments for domestic violence. Memorial marches took place in cities like Milan, Naples, and Rome, calling for systemic changes to better protect vulnerable individuals. At one rally, Giulia's sister, Chiara Tramontano, urged lawmakers to take action against the increasing number of cases where offenders face no significant consequences until it is too late. Forensic experts and investigators focused on understanding the psychological profile of Alexander. A psychological evaluation revealed troubling behavioral traits. Court-appointed psychiatrists determined that he exhibited strong narcissistic tendencies, showing no remorse for his actions. His behavior during interrogations and court appearances demonstrated a profound self-centeredness, an utter lack of empathy. He viewed others only in terms of how they could serve his interests, ignoring their feelings. His actions were motivated solely by a need to protect his reputation and keep control over those around him. Any perceived loss of power triggered a quick and dangerous reaction. During the trial, Alexander tried to appear remorseful, but neither Giulia's family nor the public found his words convincing. He claimed to be baffled about how he could commit such a horrific act, asserting it was a moment of impulsive rage that he didn't fully recognize. However, prosecutors presented compelling evidence: his online searches for poisons, the attempted poisoning, the falsified DNA test, and the false report he filed with the police. Each piece of evidence demonstrated that the crime was premeditated. After Alexander's arrest, Algra decided to help the authorities. She provided them with her messages with him, revealing that he had lied to both her and Giulia. During the trial, Algra also testified about the fake DNA test and his many attempts to manipulate her. As a witness, she was called by prosecutors to confirm important details, including how Alexander concealed his double life, lied about Giulia's pregnancy, and made excuses when the truth began to emerge. She realized that if she hadn't stumbled upon those photos on his phone, the truth could have remained hidden for much longer. During her testimony, she expressed the guilt she felt toward Giulia, even though she too had been a victim of his lies. After the trial, Algra chose not to speak to journalists, stayed out of the public eye, and tried to create some distance from the tragedy. Reports suggest that she later left Milan for another city, hoping to rebuild her life. The court found Alexander Impagnadio guilty of first-degree murder, highlighting aggravating factors such as the cruelty of the crime, the ongoing emotional abuse inflicted on the victim, and his intentional efforts to destroy evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison. In the judge's closing remarks, it was stated that such crimes cannot be justified as mere lapses in control or temporary emotional turmoil. Alexander's actions over several months showed a clear and deliberate intention to eliminate Julia. Julia's case serves as a tragic reminder of the risks posed by individuals who view their partners as possessions. It raised awareness and contributed to a larger movement aimed at protecting those who are still in danger. Julia Tramontano's radiant spirit, marked by her ambition, warmth, and unwavering resolve, continues to resonate far beyond the tragedy that claimed her life. Her courage in the face of betrayal and her dreams for her unborn child remain a powerful testament to the strength of the human heart. Through the tireless advocacy of her mother, Loredana Femiano, and sister, Chiara Tramontano, Julia's legacy fuels a growing movement to combat gender-based violence, inspiring communities to stand united for justice and protection. In every heart she touched, Julia's light shines on, a beacon of hope and a call to build a world where no one suffers in silence. On January 17, 1999, a man called 911 to report that he had found a woman unresponsive in her home. He was a friend of the victim, Miriam Illes, and had gone to check on her because she hadn't been answering his calls. When he arrived at her house, he discovered that it was locked and none of the doors would open. Looking through a window, he saw Miriam lying on the kitchen floor, clearly deceased. When the police arrived and entered the house, they found that she had been attacked in the back, specifically targeting her heart area. Investigators spoke with the man who called 911, who provided details about Miriam. She was a homemaker and had previously worked in the medical field. Miriam was active in her local community, and her friends were worried about her that day because she hadn't attended Sunday school. She was well-liked and devoted mother to a young boy, Richie. Everyone who knew her believed she had no enemies, which made her death in her locked kitchen even more perplexing. Determining Miriam's time of death was crucial, but without witnesses, the exact timing was uncertain. Police officers meticulously searched the crime scene for evidence, noting that the house appeared undisturbed and showed no signs of forced entry. All external doors to the house and garage were locked when Miriam's body was found. A telephone receiver lay near her hand, suggesting that she may have been on the phone when she was attacked, potentially catching her off guard and leaving her unaware of her attacker. Investigators also requested a report from the phone company to find out about Miriam's recent calls. While examining the crime scene to determine how the attacker entered and exited the house, detectives made a significant discovery. They found a bullet hole in a double-glazed window located just above the kitchen sink. This indicated that the person who shot Miriam was positioned outside. It appeared that Miriam had been standing, leaning against the sink, talking on the phone when she was shot. This single bullet became the key piece of evidence. Tracing the bullet's path, investigators followed it to a creek bed behind Miriam's house. As the investigation progressed, the forensics team found footprints left by size 14 Reebok basketball shoes. The placement of the tracks suggested that someone had taken a shooting stance next to a tree located right behind the kitchen window. The detectives also found a cigarette butt at the shooting site. Further searching revealed a homemade silencer, leading investigators to conclude that the crime was premeditated. The attacker had been hiding behind the tree, waiting for the right moment, smoking a cigarette, and seemed to act with intent. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. It did not appear that Miriam was involved in any illegal activities or taking risks that would endanger her. Investigators aimed to gather more information from Miriam's husband, Richard Illes, who arrived at the crime scene while they were there. Richard was a well-known cardiothoracic surgeon at Williamsport Hospital and had saved many lives. He met Miriam in the early 90s while serving as a resident at St. Louis Medical Center, where she worked as a surgical assistant. After marrying, they had a son named Richie and moved to Williamsport, where they both worked together. Miriam was active in her community, engaging in volunteer work at the symphony and church. Her vibrant personality made her well-liked among friends. Despite their wealth and status, Miriam's friends described her as down-to-earth, noting that they were among the richest people in Williamsport. Then she decided to become a stay-at-home mom, quitting her job when Richie was 2 years old and never returning to work. When Miriam was murdered in her own home, Richard became a primary focus for investigators. He told them that the last time he saw Miriam was 2 days earlier, On Friday, January 15, 1999, around 5 p.m., when he visited her before planning to travel to Chester County, Pennsylvania, to visit family. Detectives soon learned that Miriam and Richard had recently separated after 8 years of marriage, with Miriam moving out of their family home to the house where she was later found dead. She had primary custody of their son, Richie, while Richard visited the boy every weekend. Their ongoing divorce raised potential motives, prompting investigators to closely examine their relationship. Richard's behavior struck detectives as unusual. The first question he asked upon learning of Miriam's death was about the evidence that had been found, which seemed odd for someone who had just learned that his wife of 8 years and the mother of his child was dead. Additionally, Richard made an intriguing confession. He was familiar with firearms, having participated in hunting and owned guns, a common practice in the area. There was nothing particularly unusual about this admission. Investigators examined Richard's firearms to check for any connections to the crime scene. They determined that the bullet that killed Miriam was a .22 caliber, indicating the type of weapon they needed to find. Richard had several .22 caliber rifles, which the police confiscated for analysis. He became the primary suspect due to having a motive, access to weapons, and the skills necessary to commit the crime. The intense emotions in romantic relationships can shift from love to hate, which could have played a role in Miriam's death. While the weapon was being analyzed in the forensic lab, investigators looked further into Richard's personal life. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, he had a high income, but he was also paying a significant amount in child support, around $112,000 a month. This financial burden could have motivated him to want his wife dead. Investigators sought to clarify Richard's whereabouts at the time Miriam was attacked. Although Richard was supposed to pick up his son Richie that Friday evening, he opted to spend the weekend with his sister, who lived 2.5 hours away in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. He had a witness, Nancy Mitch, who could confirm the start of his trip. Nancy informed the investigators that she was with Miriam when Miriam handed over her son, Richie, to Richard. He picked up Richie around 5 p.m., and after Nancy left, Miriam seemed to be fine. The last confirmed sighting of Miriam was around 6 p.m. on Friday, January 15th. The police established that Richard took Richie from Miriam's home and left while Miriam stayed behind, and everything seemed normal. Richard told investigators that he made a quick stop before going to his sister's house. He first stopped at his own home around 9:30 p.m. and then traveled toward southeastern Pennsylvania. He stated that they reached Lewisburg and stopped at a fast food restaurant around 10 p.m. due to bad weather that evening. He called his sister at 11:24 p.m. to inform her that they would spend the night near Harrisburg. Nancy confirmed part of Richard's alibi, prompting detectives to verify the rest of his statements. They checked Richard's cell phone records, which confirmed his call to his sister. He also had a hotel receipt from the Harrisburg area, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. This corroborated Richard's account, indicating that he could not have been at the crime scene when Miriam was attacked. An examination of Richard's rifles showed that none matched the murder weapon, and the silencer found at the crime scene did not fit any of his rifles either. Furthermore, DNA samples from the silencer and a cigarette but did not match Richard's DNA. As the investigation progressed, police discovered that Richard had been having an affair with Catherine Swoyer, a colleague at Williamsport Hospital, which contributed to his separation from Miriam. His relationship with Miriam had begun similarly. He worked with her, they formed a bond, and eventually got married. A similar pattern occurred with Catherine. She worked with Richard, leading to their affair. This information led investigators to consider a possible love triangle. Catherine might have had a motive to kill Miriam in order to eliminate any chance of Richard reconciling with his wife. Jealousy can often drive people to commit terrible acts, but there were additional factors at play. In the event of a divorce, Richard and Miriam would need to divide their assets and finances. Furthermore, if they divorce, Richie is likely to stay with Miriam, which would require Richard to pay child support. Therefore, Miriam's death could be advantageous for both Richard and Catherine. Detectives aimed to determine Catherine's whereabouts at the time of Miriam's death. If Richard had left town to visit family, it would have given Catherine the opportunity to commit the murder. However, Investigators confirmed that Catherine was out of town visiting relatives and could not have been involved in the crime. This left the police without any other suspects, as both Richard and Catherine had alibis. Then, an unexpected development emerged when a person claiming to be the murderer contacted the detectives by sending letters to the police station. The first anonymous letter stated that the writer was responsible for Miriam's murder. Detectives were perplexed, as this was an unusual occurrence. Initially, they suspected it might be a prank, possibly from teenagers or someone loosely connected to the case. The writer referred to himself as a soldier of God and a soldier of death, claiming that Miriam was a bad and immoral person. The letter was both confusing and unsettling. Despite attempts to make contact, the writer took great care to hide his identity. The letters were examined for fingerprints, but none were found. They were handwritten in block letters with a pencil, making it difficult for police to analyze the handwriting. While investigators were trying to make sense of the first letter, a second letter arrived, written in a different style and showing signs of arrogance and intellectual superiority. This new letter pointed to a potential suspect, as the author mentioned having multiple academic degrees, suggesting that the crime could have been committed by someone connected to Richard's professional circle. Investigators identified Dr. Ench Zama, Richard's close friend, as the most likely suspect. Zama was described as a tall man, likely with large feet, possibly in size 14. He became a key focus for investigators regarding the anonymous letters. During questioning, he examined both letters and suggested that someone might be trying to frame him. He denied any involvement in Miriam's death and claimed he was with friends at the time of the crime. The investigators verified his alibi and confirmed that he could not have attacked Miriam. The anonymous letters were also analyzed for DNA, revealing a black hair on the sealed flap of one envelope. The DNA did not match Zama or any other samples from the crime scene. This led investigators to suspect that someone was deliberately trying to mislead them. It seemed the letter writer had taken great care to hide their identity, but did they accidentally leave behind a hair? Investigators theorized that the hair was intentionally included to confuse them, as it belonged to someone unrelated to the case. They began to suspect that false evidence had been planted. The silencer with DNA, the cigarette butt, and the letters all suggested a deliberate effort to mislead the investigation. Investigators ended up with 4 DNA samples, each belonging to different individuals. The perpetrator had cleverly planted false evidence, hoping to mislead the police and hinder the investigation. However, investigators received the crucial information they had been waiting for since the first day of the investigation, when Miriam's body was discovered. Near her body, they found a phone receiver. Upon reviewing the phone records, they learned that Miriam had been on a call with a friend throughout the evening. When detectives met with this friend, she recounted that during their conversation, she heard glass breaking and then heard Miriam exclaim, "Oh my God." After that, she heard nothing more and hung up. When she called back, she received a busy signal, leading her to assume that the call had been disconnected and that Miriam was talking to someone else. This piece of information provided detectives with the key detail they had been missing. The call ended at 10:37 p.m., which corresponded exactly with the time of Miriam's death. This was significant for the investigation. With the established time of death, detectives revisited the alibis of all potential suspects. Richard's alibi appeared less credible. Initially, he claimed to have been in the Williamsport area and said he was heading south on Highway 15 by 10 p.m. He mentioned stopping for a meal at a restaurant, and if he had truly been at the restaurant at that time, he would not have been able to commit the crime. However, investigators could not verify his presence there at that time, which weakened his alibi. Then, at 11:24 p.m., Richard called his sister to inform her that he and Richie would need to stay at a hotel. This call became crucial for the investigation. Detectives began to trace Richard's cell phone location at the time of the call, which altered the direction of the investigation. The cell phone company provided coverage maps, allowing police to estimate where Richard made the call. They found that Richard had enough time to commit the crime and reach the hotel, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. Detectives retraced the route from Miriam's home to the hotel, confirming that Richard could have committed the crime by 10:37 p.m. and still arrived in Harrisburg on time. The distance between the crime scene and the hotel was approximately 100 miles, and despite poor weather conditions, investigators made the trip within the required time frame. Now, Richard was the only suspect without an alibi. While this did not make him guilty, it did raise suspicions. The police needed concrete evidence to link him to the crime. They caught a break when two men walking in the woods found a modified rifle. Finding it unusual, they called the police. The rifle had a shortened barrel, a stock, and an optical sight, but the bolt was missing, and its serial numbers had been erased. It was identified as a rifle that matched the bullet that killed Miriam, and it was found near the road Richard drove on the night of the murder. Experts examined the suppressor found at the crime scene to see if it fit the rifle. They discovered that a screw had been added to the barrel, allowing the suppressor to attach perfectly. The challenge now was to link this weapon to Richard. The rifle was a Savage .23D Hornet, and police learned that Richard had inherited weapons from his father, with only his Aunt Jean being aware of this. A detective spoke with Richard's aunt, Jean, who showed him a photo album. In a black and white photo, she revealed her brother, aka Richard's father, posing with a Savage .23D rifle. Too many coincidences pointed to Richard as a possible perpetrator. He had inherited the rifle along with other guns, but the Savage rifle was missing from his collection. Investigators needed more evidence for a conviction. They found several DNA samples at the scene that did not match Richard's. When the snow melted, they returned to the area where the rifle was found and conducted a detailed search. They discovered a pair of athletic shoes that matched the size and tread pattern of the footprints at the crime scene, indicating that the prints could have been left by the same shoes. The coincidence of the sneakers and rifle found in the woods being linked to the crime was highly unlikely. Experts needed to establish that the shoes belonged to Richard, but the sneakers were size 14, whereas Richard wore size 10. It was possible that he deliberately wore shoes that were not his size to confuse the police. The shoes were sent for forensic analysis. A hair was found on one of the sneakers, and DNA testing revealed that it did not match Richard's. This was another setback for the investigators, but they remained determined. They theorized that Richard had given his son, Richie, sleeping pills to keep him asleep in the car. A further hair test was conducted, this time looking for a match to Richie's DNA instead of Richard's. They found a match based on mitochondrial DNA. Richard had tried to use false DNA to mislead the police, but in the end, his son's DNA linked him to the murder. Investigators believe that Richie's hair accidentally made its way into the sneaker, possibly transferred from another surface when Richard changed shoes. In December 2002, 3 years after Miriam's death, Richard was unexpectedly arrested. He had been clever in planning the crime. He created an alibi, constructed a silencer, and intentionally wore the wrong shoe size. However, he left DNA evidence on the silencer and a cigarette butt. To mislead the investigation, he even mailed a hair to the police, but all the DNA samples turned out to belong to other individuals. Richard destroyed the serial numbers on the rifle to hide his tracks, but it appeared he rushed his alibi since he didn't properly conceal the rifle and boots. Richard had meticulously prepared for this crime, modifying the rifle and making a suppressor, which required considerable time and effort. He chose a weekend for the crime when his son, Richie, was staying with him to prevent his son from witnessing any violence. The plan began on Friday around 5 p.m. when he picked up Richie from Miriam's home. He returned a few hours later, parking approximately half a mile away from her house, and gave his son a sleeping pill to ensure he would sleep through the events that were about to unfold. Richard then walked to a spot by a tree along the creek bed, waiting for the right moment when Miriam was near the kitchen window. He couldn't shoot from any other angle, so he patiently waited for hours. At 10:37 p.m., while she was on the phone with a friend, he took his shot. He left behind evidence, a cigarette butt, intentionally placed where it could be discovered. He then fled the scene, leaving size 14 shoe prints, returned to his car, and drove south. He found a secluded area to dispose of his evidence, getting rid of the rifle and sneakers before heading back. At 11:24 p.m., he called his sister, hoping the phone records would support his alibi. However, they actually indicated that he had sufficient time to commit the murder. Though Richard did not admit to the crime, the jury reached a different conclusion and convicted him. In 2004, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miriam's family issued a statement describing the situation as tragic, expressing that they felt there were no winners, but they were relieved to finally have closure and justice. Richard attempted to appeal the court's decision, but his efforts were unsuccessful. Lorraine Cox was a 32-year-old woman living in Exeter, UK. She is dating a man named Ellie who lives in Scotland. Although the distance between them is quite long, they have gotten used to it. At first, they only met on weekends and talked, but gradually their feelings for each other grew deeper. By 2020, they had been in contact in this way for 2 years. Despite the challenges of the distance, they decided to get engaged. Now, they are building a future together and preparing for their wedding. Lorraine is also planning to have their first child. However, in early 2020, their plans had to change for several reasons. By February, Lorraine had moved to Scotland to be with Ellie, where she obtained a temporary visa, and they spent considerable time together. When summer arrived, she wanted to return to Exeter to visit her family and friends for a month or two. This trip was not a breakup, she simply missed her loved ones. Afterward, she intended to return to Scotland and continue strengthening their relationship. Although restrictions in the UK remained strict, they were gradually relaxing, allowing public events to resume and many establishments to reopen. People eagerly took to the streets to socialize again, and Lorraine was no exception. On September 1, 2020, she arrived at her father's house in Exeter, excited to reconnect with friends. They spent the evening visiting several bars, enjoying drinks and good company, until they realized it was time to go home. Everyone left in a good mood. On September 2nd, Lorraine posted an unusual message on social media, claiming she was going to leave the country. This surprised everyone, as her only previous move had been to Scotland, and she had no plans to relocate again. She had just arrived to visit her father and intended to stay for at least a month. This sudden change in her mood and plans seemed out of character. In her post, Lorraine mentioned wanting to move about 50 kilometers from her father's house to a place called Plymouth, which she described as the first stop on her planned journey. This behavior was shocking because Lorraine was not known for making impulsive decisions, especially on such a significant scale. She had a stable life and a loving relationship in Scotland and had never mentioned wanting to move elsewhere. Now, she was considering a move toward France. Unsurprisingly, this post had a deep impact on Ellie. They had a strong relationship, making his fear of losing her understandable. Lorraine's friends bombarded her with questions. Initially, she responded willingly, but as the conversation progressed, her tone changed and mistrust grew. Those who knew her well noticed shifts in her writing style. She began using unfamiliar emojis, making odd mistakes, and her messages conveyed a sense of hostility. This worried her loved ones, as she had always maintained positive relationships with them, and there was no reason for her to display such aggression or undergo drastic life changes. Her father, Tony, who was hosting her during this time, even showed a family friend her old messages alongside the new ones. He pointed out clear inconsistencies in her writing style. Even those who didn't know her well noticed something was off. Throughout this time, Lorraine's boyfriend, who was named Ellie, was especially concerned and tried to understand her behavior. Initially, she responded to him with short, cold replies, but eventually, her answers became even more abrupt. The conversation ended when Lorraine sent him an emoji of a middle finger. This intensified the suspicion that someone else was using her account. Ellie had known Lorraine for 2 years, so the idea that the trip was related to a breakup or conflict seemed unlikely. They valued each other, which made her odd responses even more perplexing. Unfortunately, because of the distance, her boyfriend felt helpless and unable to intervene. A situation arose concerning Tony, Lorraine's father. Determined to discover the truth, he faced a challenge because he was away at the time and couldn't check his daughter's room for clues. Instead, he began speaking to Lorraine's friends, particularly those who had been with her the day before her sudden move to Plymouth. He was scheduled to return home the next day. Upon arriving home, Tony's first action was to go to Lorraine's room, where his suspicions grew stronger. He had already spoken with her close friends, and they all confirmed that no one had seen Lorraine since their breakup at the bar when everyone had left for the night. Inside Lorraine's room, it appeared as though she had never returned after her outing with friends. Her belongings from Scotland remained untouched, and nothing was missing from her room. It looked as if she had left for an extended trip without taking any of her things, which seemed impossible. The most alarming discovery was the bag she had left behind. Lorraine had diabetes and always carried a first aid kit to monitor her blood sugar levels. Her health depended on these supplies, and she never went anywhere, even for a quick trip to the store, without them. For outings like the one to the bar, she typically used a smaller bag. The fact that her larger kit was still in her room raised serious concerns about her recent plans. Tony realized that his daughter had not returned from the party, leading him to fear that something might have happened to her health. The messages she had exchanged with friends and relatives also seemed troubling. Worried, Tony sent another message to Lorraine on social media, expressing concern for her health and asking if she was okay. He warned her that if she did not respond, he would have to contact the police. The message was seen, but he received no reply. After that, Tony's and Lorraine's friends could no longer tolerate the uncertainty and began their search. They started by looking for clues in the bar where they had spent the evening on September 2nd. They interviewed witnesses, distributed flyers, and retraced the presumed route Lorraine would have taken home. It was clear that something alarming must have happened during her journey since she never came home again. Law enforcement and journalists quickly became involved. They were skeptical of the theory that Lorraine might have suffered a health crisis. Detectives believed that if that were the case, she would not have been able to send messages to her friends. Furthermore, several days had passed since her disappearance, and she would likely have been found in a hospital, but tests of recent admissions yielded no results. It appeared far more likely that Lorraine had encountered danger from someone. Journalists rushed to report on the situation, highlighting concerns over Lorraine's disappearance. They recalled that in May 2018, 2 years before Lorraine vanished, an attacker named Robert Proud had attacked a woman who strikingly resembled her. He had abused her but did not kill her, and then evaded capture for a long time. Given his criminal history, it raised fears that there could be more victims. Although he had completed his prison sentence, investigators began considering Lorraine as a potential victim. At the time of her disappearance, Robert was living near the path Lorraine would have taken home. This connection led to his arrest, and police sought to extract a confession from him. They believed he had kidnapped, abused, and possibly killed her, and that he might have disposed of her body. It was suspected that he took her phone and pretended to communicate with her friends and family to buy himself time and create confusion. There was another theory regarding Lorraine's disappearance. Some believed that Robert might have attacked her, but instead of dying, she was hiding to avoid becoming his victim again. The detectives prioritized finding Lorraine because she was clearly in danger. Robert might have been holding her hostage. The situation could have escalated, posing a significant threat. To test this theory, they began reviewing surveillance footage from cameras along Lorraine's potential route that night. Even after narrowing down the time frame, they had about 11,000 hours of footage from over 400 cameras across 120 different locations. Analyzing this footage was time-consuming, but it proved worthwhile, yielding the first clues needed to catch the criminal. Eventually, they spotted a girl who matched Lorraine's description in the recordings. After leaving her friends at the bar, she headed toward her father's house without making any turns. She almost made it home, but a few blocks away, something caught her attention: a kebab shop on the ground floor of an apartment building, which was open at night. Lorraine went inside, likely to grab a snack, and then left to eat on a bench before continuing her way home. Around 2:45 a.m., she returned to the kebab shop, but this time accompanied by an unfamiliar man. This raised alarms because he didn't appear to be just a random passerby. The footage suggested they had interacted, and he had managed to get her attention. The police continued to investigate the recordings and noted that the young man had been following Lorraine after they left the shop. This behavior was concerning, especially since she seemed to be walking voluntarily and the street was deserted. Detectives suspected the man might be a predator who targeted his victim, potentially involved in Lorraine's disappearance and the messages she had sent to her loved ones after the incident. He maintained a distance while following her, trying to remain inconspicuous, and seemed to be assessing the situation. It looked as though he was stalking her, especially since she appeared intoxicated and was stumbling. She had a valuable phone, and with no one accompanying her that night, he saw an opportunity to attack. The police attempted to locate another recording to determine how Lorraine left the building from at least one camera, but were unsuccessful. It appeared she had not exited at all. They spent considerable time reviewing the video footage, only to confirm that Lorraine had not left since she was last seen. The detectives concluded that she might still be inside, possibly being held against her will. Unfortunately, by the time they gathered this information, 8 days had passed. Given this long duration, only a miracle could save Lorraine, who suffered from diabetes. Nevertheless, her family held on to hope. The police obtained a clear photo of the man who accompanied and followed Lorraine that night. They printed it out and began distributing it through the media to attract witnesses. Initially, they visited the kebab shop and spoke with the owner. He informed them that he lived above the shop but had rented the apartment below to a young man about a month ago. This young man had moved in unofficially and was very withdrawn, to the extent that the owner didn't know much about him. The owner even expressed doubts about the young man's name. When police officers visited the apartment, they anticipated finding a crime scene. However, everything was surprisingly neat and clean. The young man living there identified himself as Christopher Mayer and showed them his identification. There was no sign of Lorraine in the apartment, and he allowed the detectives inside without any resistance. They inspected the place thoroughly to ensure that no one was being held against their will. Christopher was then shown a photo of Lorraine, along with a CCTV image in which a man resembling him was seen accompanying her to the house. He strongly denied any connection, claiming that he did not know her. However, the clear photograph made the police skeptical, as the similarities were unmistakable. A brief verbal confrontation ensued, with Christopher maintaining his stance. During this exchange, he insisted that he would never bring a strange woman to his apartment. The police then became interested in Christopher's mobile phone, which they seized for examination. They discovered that it contained Lorraine's SIM card, although the card was currently missing. This evidence confirmed that he had at least seen her recently. Further investigation revealed that a suspicious post had been made on Lorraine's social media account using this mobile phone. It appeared that Christopher had sent strange messages to her loved ones. After the unsettling incident, whatever it was, he had taken Lorraine's phone. Rather than using it for communication, he inserted a SIM card into his own phone to access her contact list and social media account. This raised further suspicions about Christopher. He was the last person confirmed to have seen Lorraine alive, and his attempts to manipulate her account seemed suspicious. It became clear that he was trying to cover his tracks, raising questions about his motives that the authorities still needed to uncover. Christopher was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Lorraine Cox. That same day, forensic experts arrived at his apartment to investigate. They used a substance called luminol to carefully examine the area. While they found several suspicious traces of evidence, the most alarming findings were in a nearby alley. During their search of the apartment, they discovered blood and numerous signs that supported the theory that Lorraine was dead, particularly around a garbage can. The forensic team speculated that Christopher might have disposed of evidence by throwing away the body. They searched the alley and found a large plastic bag inside one of the trash containers that contained human remains. However, it was not a complete body. Some parts, including the torso and head, were missing, making identification difficult. Consequently, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation, and the work continued. Detectives learned that on the night of Lorraine's disappearance, in addition to Christopher, 5 other young men were present. However, none appeared on the CCTV footage with Lorraine. These men likely entered the apartment to buy food or for other reasons, but their involvement needed further investigation. They could have unwittingly been present during the crime or could have assisted in covering up evidence. Notably, the group behaved very differently. Except for Christopher, everyone was cooperative and willing to provide information. Upon further investigation, the 5 other young men were found to be locals who lived nearby. Since there was no evidence against them, they were released. In stark contrast, Christopher was uncooperative, reluctant to talk, and often gave vague or confusing answers. He seemed to believe that the police lacked sufficient evidence against him, but they soon discovered that his real name was Azam Mangori. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation, as detectives confronted him with the truth, signaling the beginning of the unraveling of his story. Azam claims that he changed his name because he was born in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where people who do not follow tradition can face severe punishment, including being stoned to death. As an adult, he left his conservative homeland but still lives in fear of being hunted down and killed. To avoid this dangerous situation, he began calling himself Christopher. He had been living illegally in the UK since December 2018 to avoid returning to Iraq. Azam also possessed a high-quality fake ID under the name Christopher Mayer to evade detection by immigration authorities. This explains why the landlord knew almost nothing about the man. He was very cautious, had not attended school or worked anywhere, and lived off odd jobs. However, the interrogation ended abruptly. After admitting to these things, he refused to talk about Lorraine. His previous admissions were not significant to the police. DNA testing confirmed that the remains found in a trash bin were those of Lorraine. In Azam's apartment, DNA traces and other evidence indicated that Lorraine had been killed there because Azam had failed to clean thoroughly. The police also discovered a large handsaw and replacement blades purchased after the crime. Other items found included a driver's license, a debit card, and a wallet, all mutilated. Nearby trash bins contained bloody clothing, Lorraine's phone, and a SIM card discarded in the sewer. Unfortunately, parts of her body were never recovered. Detectives analyzed the location data from Azam's mobile phone on the day of Lorraine's murder and the subsequent days when he disposed of evidence. This investigation led them to a location on the city's outskirts known as Tin Pit Hill. During the search, they found Lorraine's torso and head, which were not well concealed. Investigators noted unsettling details. A piece of clothing was stuffed into her mouth, and a patch of skin was missing from her back, possibly taken as a trophy by the perpetrator. Unfortunately, no other body parts were located, and the remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, complicating the determination of the cause of death. The forensic expert concluded that Lorraine had likely been strangled. Despite strong evidence of his guilt, Azam continued to deny his involvement and created false stories. He even attempted to involve banned organizations in the case. The trial commenced in spring 2021. Although he never confessed, Azam and his defense team significantly altered his narrative. He now claimed to have a normal orientation and stated that he encountered Lorraine when she came to his place late at night after a bar visit. He approached her on the street and convinced her to come to his apartment for some intimacy. Azam maintained that Lorraine voluntarily came to his apartment after drinking heavily and using illegal substances. He claimed that after trying those substances himself, he experienced severe distortion of perception and lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he found Lorraine in the bathroom, unresponsive. He alleged that he saw a puddle of urine beneath her and believed she had overdosed. Azam attempted to perform CPR, but it was unsuccessful. In a panic and without knowing the emergency number, he sat on the bathroom floor next to her body. Hallucinations then began, and he claimed to see dark creatures emerging from her mouth, prompting him to shove a piece of his t-shirt into her mouth to stop it. He pushed the cloth in so far that it could have caused her to choke. Despite being in a state of panic, he managed to find and send a video he had recorded around the same time to a friend, where he appeared calm and even exhaled smoke into the camera. He explained that he filmed the video to help himself calm down. His behavior grew increasingly bizarre. Instead of calling for help, he decided to dispose of the body and planned to flee from his relatives. Naturally, this account sounded implausible, leaving him with no solid defense. According to Azam, he was unsure what he would do after Lorraine died and kept her body in his apartment until he decided to dispose of it. When his anxiety reached its peak, he chose to throw it away. He called a taxi to take the bag with the remains to a wooded area on the outskirts of Exeter. Prosecutors noted that he seemed to be obsessed with amputation, as evidenced by the precise cuts he made, which horrified forensic experts. It was clear he had researched this topic extensively and was well prepared. That evening, Azam tried to connect with people on an escort website, seeking companionship but was unsuccessful. Later, he saw Lorraine on the street eating alone and viewed her as an ideal target. It seems that Azam may have premeditated this murder to fulfill his dark fantasies. Even with substantial evidence against him, his trial lasted 5 weeks. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of murder and attempting to obstruct justice. He received a life sentence but is eligible for parole after 20 years, which means he could be released at the age of 44. Lorraine's boyfriend, Ellie, experienced profound grief, stating that a part of him died with her. He lives daily with this pain and struggles against despair. Lorraine's father, Tony, organized a charity march to rally support for his daughter. Participants silently walked the route she would have taken from the bar to her home, a journey she never completed. In the aftermath, Tony became an activist advocating for more CCTV cameras on UK streets to help prevent and solve violent crimes. He also started to make regular donations to an anti-abuse organization based in the UK. Even after justice was served, Lorraine Cox's family remained uncertain about how Azam was able to lure her into his apartment. Security footage showed her following him willingly. Azam claimed that he engaged her in conversation and offered her alcohol and a banned substance, which she accepted. However, toxicology reports found no traces of banned substances in her system, and a forensic expert stated that she did not die from diabetes, suggesting that Azam's account might be false. Sadly, the truth about what happened in his apartment may never be revealed, as only Azam and Lorraine know what truly occurred. Some believe Azam exploited Lorraine's kindness by asking for help, and that she may have felt unable to refuse, ultimately leading her into a dangerous situation. Being gullible can be dangerous, sometimes even life-threatening. We all have moments when we wish to believe in miracles, feel that dreams might still be within reach. When something you've wished for seems almost attainable, it's easy to let caution and common sense slip away. Criminals often take advantage of this vulnerability. The case of Elodie Morel, a young French woman, in 2005 shocked the nation due to its brutality and inhumanity. What made it even more disturbing was the indifference shown by ordinary people who were aware of her situation but chose to remain silent for their own gain. This story reminds us that not all dreams come true and highlights the importance of being cautious about whom you trust, especially when they promise a fairy tale ending. Elodie Morel was born on 1976, in Marseille. From a young age, she had a strikingly beautiful appearance. As she grew older, Elodie developed into an even more stunning woman, with many people believing she should be on television or magazine covers. As a teenager, she dreamed of being a model, but coming from a modest background, few took her aspirations seriously. In the 1990s, Elodie submitted her photos to various modeling agencies several times but never received any replies. After finishing high school, she attended college, married a classmate named Sylvain at 22, and had a son by 25. It appeared she had abandoned her modeling dreams permanently. By 2005, Elodie worked as a sales associate at a trendy clothing store in downtown Marseille. She often received compliments and noticed people admiring or envying her looks. At 29, she maintained a perfect figure and beautiful features, easily appearing to be in her early 20s. Though Elodie never completely gave up on her modeling aspirations, she stopped discussing them, believing her time had passed. In April 2005, Elodie filled out an online application, submitted her best photos, and expressed her desire to pursue a modeling career. She soon received a reply, but what seemed like a promising opportunity from a fashion photographer turned out to be a dangerous trap. About 2 weeks after posting her profile, Elodie received an enticing offer to become the new face of the prestigious English luxury car company, Rolls-Royce. The contract promised €1,000 per day for a photo shoot, but to secure the deal, she needed to meet the photographer for a test shoot. The meeting was scheduled for May 2nd at a bar in Aix-Mortes. Excited, Elodie shared the news with her husband, who was doubtful but didn't voice his concerns. That morning, she left her son with her parents, got into her car, and drove to the meeting location. She planned to stay in Aix-Mortes for 3 days and had already booked a hotel room. Later that evening, Elodie called her husband to update him on her progress and mentioned she was feeling nervous. Sylvain wished her luck, told her to call him as soon as she could. This would be the last conversation he had with his wife. When Elodie arrived at the bar as planned, she sat at a table on the terrace, waiting to meet the female photographer she believed she had been emailing. However, about 10 minutes later, a man in his mid-40s approached her. He introduced himself as the photographer's assistant, explained that he was there to meet her and scout locations for the photo shoot scheduled for the next day. Since Elodie had little experience in the modeling industry, she didn't find anything suspicious about him, took him at his word. The man appeared professional, spoke confidently, and seemed knowledgeable about her prior conversations with the photographer. Their conversation flowed easily and revolved around Elodie's potential career. She began to imagine herself on the covers of popular magazines, daydreamed about how she would spend the money she would earn. Around 9 p.m., as night fell, the man proposed they look for the ideal spot for the next day's photo shoot. Aix-Mortes, a beautiful medieval town, is filled with scenic towers, fortresses, and chapels, perfect locations for taking stunning pictures. Excited and unaware of any danger, Elodie left the bar with her new acquaintance and got into his car. Tragically, she was never seen alive again. What is particularly unsettling is that a man who knew the suspect and was aware of his malicious intentions witnessed the entire encounter. He tried to step in, but his efforts were futile. That same night, on May 2nd, a call came into the Aix-Mortes police station. A panicked man reported that a young woman was in serious danger and that immediate action was needed. He did not know the victim's name or her location, but he was convinced time was running out. The caller was 63-year-old Dominique Tarasco, a nightclub owner who frequently provided the police with confidential information. He stated that earlier that night, he had seen his acquaintance, Guillaume Mingaud, at the bar. Guillaume had connections to the criminal underworld and was notorious for his violent behavior. The day before, he had boasted about meeting a naive, attractive girl online whom he intended to abduct and sell to a brothel in Spain for a substantial profit. Starting the search for Elodie Morel was challenging because the police had no solid leads, names, or locations. They knew that finding her quickly was crucial. By the next morning, they learned her name when her worried family reached out, reporting that she had been missing since the previous evening and that her phone was turned off. They explained that she had left for a photo shoot in another town and then disappeared. Initially, the police did not link her disappearance to the family's report. They thought she might have run away with a romantic partner. However, her family stressed that she would never leave her young son or vanish without a message. The search for Elodie did not officially start until 3 days after she went missing, which wasted valuable time. Tragically, during those 2 days, Elodie was still alive, being held captive in a house in Vergès where she suffered torture and abuse as her captors decided what to do with her. On May 5, 2005, the lead investigator in Aix-Mortes' missing person case began to suspect that she was the endangered woman mentioned by an informant. Dominique Tarasco was called to the police station to provide a formal statement. When shown a photo of Elodie, he immediately confirmed that she was the woman he had seen 3 days earlier in a bar with Guillaume. When asked where he thought Guillaume might have taken Elodie, Dominique recalled hearing about an empty nightclub on the north side of town that had recently closed down. A police team conducted a surveillance operation at that location, and by that evening, they arrested 48-year-old Guillaume and 53-year-old Richard as they arrived at the nightclub. The exact role of Richard in this case remained unclear and needed further investigation. During a search of Guillaume, police discovered Elodie Morel's credit card in one of Guillaume's pockets, which confirmed his involvement in her disappearance. Both men were taken to the station for questioning, but Richard was released a few hours later due to insufficient evidence against him. Richard lived with his family on the outskirts of town and had a friendly relationship with Guillaume, but he had no prior legal issues. Guillaume initially claimed he didn't know Elodie and that he had just stolen her credit card. In his first account, he said that on May 2nd, while at a bar, he spotted an attractive, well-dressed woman and assumed she had money. He decided to rob her. Guillaume approached Elodie's table, gave her a compliment, and offered to buy her a coffee. Although she stated she was waiting for someone, she didn't tell him to leave. They engaged in a brief conversation, during which he managed to take her credit card from her purse that was hanging on her chair, leaving before she realized it was gone. Guillaume insisted that the entire incident was spontaneous. He claimed he only stole her card and had no involvement in her disappearance. Investigators found that he used the stolen card the same day to withdraw cash from an ATM located on the outskirts of town. However, he could not explain how he knew the PIN, which made his story seem unreliable. Additionally, a background check revealed that Guillaume had a criminal history with multiple convictions, including armed robbery, banned substance trafficking, and a 9-year prison sentence for a violent abuse. Despite being released from prison, Guillaume had not changed his behavior. Instead, he had become more cautious to avoid returning to jail. The situation worsened for Guillaume when police discovered Elodie's phone number in his phone, along with their email exchanges regarding a photo shoot. This evidence contradicted his initial account and forced him to change his story. He admitted that he found Elodie's modeling profile online and began messaging her while pretending to be a photographer. Elodie, being trusting and eager, quickly agreed to meet him without much skepticism. Guillaume had been using a female alias to communicate with her, which made him nervous that she might become suspicious when a man showed up instead of the expected photographer. Nevertheless, Elodie saw nothing unusual and willingly went with him late at night to check out possible locations for the photo shoot, even getting into his car without hesitation, a fact later confirmed by witnesses. After driving to a remote location, Guillaume left the main road and stopped the car. He pulled out a gun and demanded that Elodie give him her credit card. When she refused, he took her purse and found the card himself. He then insisted on getting the PIN, but Elodie still wouldn't provide it. Angered, he slammed her head against the dashboard, choked her until she finally gave in and revealed the code. After that, he locked Elodie in the trunk and went to the nearest ATM to check if she was telling the truth. The PIN worked, and he emptied her account. With the money in his possession, he started thinking about what to do next with the woman locked in his trunk. Feeling the need for time to figure things out, Guillaume drove to his friend Richard's house to hide Elodie for a while. He told Richard about the woman in his trunk, mentioned that he planned to sell her for a significant profit, which he was willing to share with Richard. It's worth noting that Richard and his wife once worked at the same nightclub. He is a security guard and she is a cleaner. After the nightclub closed, they both lost their jobs and were struggling to get by, leading Richard to begin drinking heavily. Richard agreed to help Guillaume by giving him the keys to his empty garage, suggesting it as a place to keep the woman. He wanted to avoid any direct interaction with her and preferred to let Guillaume handle things, hoping to receive a share of the money. Later investigations found that Elodie had been held captive for more than 2 days, during which she suffered severe torture, assault, beatings, and severe hunger and thirst. Guillaume reported that he and Elodie spent a lot of time talking about their children, who were of similar ages. Elodie pleaded for her release, arguing that her son needed her. Guillaume admitted that he felt some sympathy for her and briefly considered letting her go. He even brought her a bottle of water because the garage was extremely hot and she had been there for 2 days. However, on the night of May 4th, everything changed when Richard, heavily intoxicated, decided to confront Elodie. Guillaume claimed that while he was away, Richard entered the garage and strangled Elodie with a rope. Guillaume maintained that he did not take part in the actual murder and only helped to hide her body. However, he would not disclose the location of her remains. During the police search of the Lignier residence, they seemed nervous but not particularly shocked. They allowed the officers to enter without resistance and continued eating at the kitchen table, showing little concern for the search. The police discovered several items belonging to Elodie in their teenage daughter's room, such as her cell phone, jewelry, a hair clip, and a wristwatch. Additionally, Elodie's purse and wallet were found with Richard's wife. Other items, including torn pieces of the victim's clothing, were found in the trash bin outside the house. More alarming evidence was revealed in Richard's garage. Investigators found dried brown stains that looked like blood, along with crumpled tissues, cigarette butts, an empty plastic bottle, and a piece of rope. Both Richard and his wife, Francine, were arrested, while their 14-year-old daughter was temporarily placed with relatives. When asked how Elodie's belongings came to be in their home, they explained that Guillaume had brought them in exchange for using their garage. They acknowledged knowing that he was holding a woman there but chose not to intervene because he had promised to reward them. They also admitted to giving him a bottle of water and a piece of rope when he asked, without questioning his motives. Forensic evidence showed that the brown stains on the garage floor were Elodie's blood. Additionally, DNA found on crumpled tissues matched Guillaume's. Saliva found on cigarette butts belonged to both Elodie and Guillaume. Elodie's family asserted that she had never smoked due to her asthma, which caused her to have severe coughing and choking fits when exposed to cigarette smoke. The chilling reality emerged. Guillaume had kept Elodie in the garage for 2 days, repeatedly assaulting and likely torturing her, forcing her to smoke as part of his abuse. Guillaume changed his story after the investigators revealed the forensic evidence. He admitted that he and Elodie had been intimate in the garage, but insisted it was consensual. He claimed they had smoked together and talked a lot before he decided to let her go. However, he still maintained that Richard Lignier had killed her while he was away, supposedly because Richard feared Elodie might go to the police after he released her. This explanation raised many inconsistencies, the most significant being that Richard had no motive to kill Elodie. First, he had never met her, and she had never seen him or any of his family members. Second, Elodie had been brought to the garage in the trunk of a car, meaning she wouldn't have known where she was and couldn't lead the police there. Lastly, Richard was just an ordinary drunk, unable to physically harm anyone. He was satisfied with receiving payment in the form of Elodie's belongings and a promise of money from his friend once the situation was resolved. Earlier, investigators discovered an empty plastic water bottle in the garage. Guillaume claimed he felt sorry for Elodie and brought her water, but tests revealed that the liquid contained high levels of potent drugs. After consuming these drugs, Elodie would have likely been unconscious or barely aware, giving Guillaume the opportunity to do as he pleased. When questioned about why he drugged her, Guillaume changed his story again. He now said he was prepared to set her free and that they had agreed she wouldn't go to the police. He claimed Elodie wanted to return home to her family and forget the incident, as if it were just a bad dream. However, he asserted that she attempted to escape, which resulted in a struggle during which he hit her, explaining the blood stains found on the garage floor. He then locked her inside and left. Guillaume stated he drugged Elodie to calm her and prevent her from trying to escape again. He crushed some pills, dissolved them in water, and then departed, returning 12 hours later. By that time, Elodie was severely dehydrated. She quickly drank the water without noticing its odd taste and passed out within minutes. Guillaume claimed she accidentally overdosed because her weakened body couldn't handle the drugs. Realizing she had stopped breathing, he put her body in the trunk of her car, which he had left in a parking lot near the bar where they first met. Later, he drove the car to Richard's property using the keys he had taken from her. Although Guillaume refused to disclose where he took the car with Elodie's body, his account had numerous inconsistencies. Notably, a rope found in the garage contained sweat and skin cells from both Elodie and Guillaume, suggesting he likely strangled her. All the evidence was stacked against him, and he was aware of it. To reduce his sentence, Guillaume struck a deal with investigators, confessing that he had left the car near the old cemetery in Aigues-Mortes. The police found the vehicle on May 6, exactly where he indicated. It had been exposed to the sun for 3 days, and the body in the trunk was already decomposing. The autopsy revealed clear signs of torture, beatings, and strangulation. The victim had been tied up, drugged, assaulted, and ultimately strangled to death with a rope. The trial for the 3 individuals involved in the crime began in February 2008, nearly 3 years after the shocking events. Guillaume Mingaud was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Richard Lignier and his wife attempted to persuade the jury that they had no knowledge of the captive in their garage. They claimed they had merely let an old friend stay with them for a few days without asking questions. However, the discovery of the victims' belongings in their home contradicted their story. Ligniers was charged with aiding and abetting. In 2010, each received a 6-year prison sentence. Guillaume and his lawyer appealed the court's decision, attempting to place some of the blame for the crime on the Lignier. This was their only chance to lessen his life sentence and reduce the minimum time he would have to serve. On May 3, 2010, exactly 5 years after Elodie Morel's murder, the new trial began. During the proceedings, it was revealed that Richard and Francine were aware of Elodie's captivity and the serious danger she faced, yet they took no action. Not only did they keep her belongings and give some to their daughter, but they also supplied Guillaume with everything he requested, such as rope and water, without questioning his motives or considering the consequences. Ultimately, the court reduced Guillaume Mingaud's life sentence to 30 years, requiring him to serve 2/3 of that time before he could be eligible for parole. Richard and Francine Lignier, due to their complicity and inaction, were each sentenced to 8 years in prison with no chance for early release. The tragic case of Elodie Morel serves as a harrowing reminder of the perils of unchecked trust and the devastating consequences of bystander indifference. Her dream of a modeling career, pursued with Rosa with hope, was cruelly exploited by Guillaume Mingaud, whose deceit led to her brutal torture and murder. Equally disturbing is the complicity of Richard and Francine Lignier, who prioritized personal gain over human life, allowing Elodie's suffering to continue in their garage. This case underscores the critical need for vigilance in the face of enticing promises and the moral imperative to act against injustice. Elodie's story, etched into France's collective memory, calls us to honor her by fostering skepticism, compassion, and courage to prevent such tragedies from recurring. In October 1975, the murder of 15-year-old Martha Elizabeth Moxley shocked the town of Greenwich, Connecticut. Her body was found brutally beaten with a golf club, which was traced back to the home of a well-known family with political ties. This tragic event caused years of anguish for the Moxley family as they sought justice for their daughter's death. Let's go back in time. The Moxley family moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, hoping to find a safe environment for their children, John and Martha. Their parents allowed them to explore the town freely, trusting in their safety. Martha was a remarkable teenager known for her beauty and intelligence. She had a vibrant personality and a close bond with her brother. Throughout her childhood, Martha showed impressive intellect. Her love for reading and writing reflected her passion for knowledge. Martha was well liked by her peers because of her outstanding qualities. Her lively and friendly nature helped her make many friends. She often found herself at the center of social gatherings. After the Moxley family moved to their new home in Greenwich, Martha continued to excel in school. Her commitment to her studies showed through her excellent grades and achievements. She had a natural gift for critical thinking and problem solving, distinguishing her from her classmates. Martha's aspirations went beyond academics. She wanted to impact the world through her writing. Her love for storytelling and her talent for expressing ideas clearly made her a strong candidate for a journalism career. October 30th was recognized as Mischief Night in Greenwich. During this tradition, children and teens engaged in playful mischief, often causing minor disturbances in their neighborhoods. The night typically involved activities like vandalism, property damage, and pranks. Eager to join in the fun, Martha Moxley spent the evening playing toilet papering over houses with her friends. It was a joyful night filled with laughter and innocent entertainment among the teenagers. Among the partygoers was 17-year-old Thomas Skakel, the nephew of Ethel Kennedy, who is the widow of former U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The Kennedy family was one of the most powerful and well-known political families in the United States from the 1960s to the early 1990s. Their name became closely associated with American politics, impacting all areas of society. President John F. Kennedy was viewed as a symbol of youthful energy and change, captivating the nation with his charisma. His administration made important advances in space exploration, civil rights, and foreign policy. After John's assassination, Robert F. Kennedy took on the role of leader for the family's political ambitions, known for his commitment to social justice and strong support for the civil rights movement. Robert's assassination added to the sorrow of the already mourning Kennedy family. However, their involvement in various scandals and controversies has damaged their reputation and overshadowed their political legacy. Sources indicate that Martha Moxley and Thomas Skakel were flirting and even kissing on the night she disappeared. The last sighting of Martha was around 9:30 p.m. when she was with Thomas near the pool in his backyard. After that, no one knew where she was until a shocking discovery was made the next morning, which stunned the entire community. On October 31st, the day after Mischief Night, Martha Moxley's body was discovered under a tree in her yard. Her clothing and underwear were pulled down to her ankles, but the medical examiner found no signs of abuse assault. Nearby, pieces of a 6-iron golf club were located, which became a key piece of evidence in understanding the circumstances surrounding Martha's death. The chief medical examiner of Connecticut performed an autopsy on Martha. His findings revealed disturbing details. Martha had multiple scalp lacerations, skull fractures, and injuries to her brain. The absence of signs of a struggle led the medical examiner to determine that Martha had been violently assaulted. The medical examiner determined that the weapon that caused her injuries and death was a 6-iron golf club, which matched evidence collected at the scene. The severity of her injuries and the strong evidence linking the golf club to the murder confirmed that her death was neither an accident nor an end to her own life. They classified Martha's death as a homicide. Witnesses reported seeing Martha with Thomas Skakel on the night she died, raising suspicions and directing detectives' focus towards the Skakel family. An investigation later found that the golf club used to kill Martha originated from the Skakel home, which further increased doubts about the involvement of the two Skakel brothers. Although the investigation made initial progress, it soon stalled due to interference from the Skakel family. They interfered with the investigation right from the beginning. One significant way they obstructed progress was by blocking the police from accessing their son's school medical records. These records could have shed light on Thomas Skakel's behavior and any health issues he might have had at the time of the crime. By denying investigators this information, the Skakel family hindered the exploration of potential motives. Thomas's father took further actions to impede the investigation. He discouraged witnesses from stepping forward or sharing what they knew about the crime, making it challenging for investigators to gather first-hand testimonies. This interference also significantly hampered the progress of the investigation. When news of Martha's murder emerged, Thomas and Michael Skakel, grandsons of Robert F. Kennedy, became targets of intense media scrutiny. Reporters and the public were eager to uncover any potential involvement or connections to Martha's death. As members of the Kennedy family, the brothers faced overwhelming speculation. Throughout the investigation, Thomas and Michael maintained their innocence, asserting that they had no involvement in Martha's murder. They consistently denied being at the party where she was killed and claimed ignorance about the circumstances of her death. Their repeated denials attracted even more media attention and public interest in the case. However, despite the extensive coverage, there was no solid evidence linking the brothers to Martha's murder. The murder of Martha Moxley attracted worldwide attention because of the involvement of the Kennedy family. Initially, attention turned to Kenneth Littleton, who was hired as a tutor by the Skakel family just hours before Martha's murder. Littleton was a live-in tutor for the Skakel brothers, and since he was present near the crime scene, he was suspected of being an accomplice. His interactions with the brothers were examined, and some believed he might have influenced them to commit the crime. As time passed, the testimonies from Thomas and Michael Skakel about that night began to change. Witnesses reported that Michael had confessed to killing Martha with a golf club. Additionally, a former classmate of Michael claimed he received preferential treatment and boasted about escaping punishment for the murder because of his ties to the Kennedy family. Many books have been written about the Moxley murder in an effort to uncover the truth about her death. One notable book is A Season in Purgatory by acclaimed author Dominic Dunn, which focuses on the Moxley murder case. Dunn conducted thorough research to provide a detailed account of the events leading up to Martha's death. Another significant book, Murder in Greenwich by Mark Furman, a former police detective known, presents his perspective on the investigation and various theories surrounding the case. These books examine different theories proposed by investigators and advocates for justice for Martha. Despite significant media and public interest, the case remained unsolved, which caused frustration for both investigators and the public. The tragic death of Martha Moxley shocked the community and led to a lengthy investigation that lasted nearly 2 decades. In 1998, a jury was assembled to examine the circumstances of her murder. After a thorough inquiry lasting almost 2 years, there was enough evidence to charge Michael Skakel with the crime. In January 2000, police issued an arrest warrant for Michael, who then turned himself in. He was soon released on bail after posting a $500,000 bond. On March 14, 2000, Michael was arraigned in juvenile court. Although he was 15 years old when Martha was murdered, the judge decided to try him as an adult. Michael Skakel's trial began on May 7, 2002, in Norwalk, Connecticut. Prosecutors built a strong case by presenting evidence linking him to the crime and highlighting inconsistencies in his alibi. The defense maintained that Michael was innocent, arguing he was at a cousin's house when the murder occurred. The murder trial of Martha Moxley received extensive media coverage, drawing attention from both national outlets and the local community. Many people were invested in the case, hoping for justice for the victim. During the trial, the prosecution introduced a book proposal that suggested his involvement in the crime. In this proposal, Michael admitted to engaging in inappropriate behavior while in a tree on the night of the murder. Although he acknowledged being at the crime scene, he did not confess to directly harming Martha. Ultimately, on June 7, 2002, Michael Skakel was convicted of Moxley's murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He was assigned to Garner Correctional Facility in Newtown, Connecticut. Reactions to the verdict were mixed, with some individuals feeling satisfied and others raising concerns. Michael Skakel appealed his conviction, presenting several arguments. One of his main points was that the trial should have occurred in juvenile court instead of superior court, as he was only 15 years old at the time of the crime. He contended that his age should have prevented him from being charged as an adult. Furthermore, Skakel claimed that the prosecution committed misconduct by not disclosing crucial evidence that could have exonerated him, which he argued violated his due process rights and compromised the fairness of his trial. Nevertheless, in January 2006, the Connecticut Supreme Court dismissed his claims and upheld his conviction. In 2007, Michael Skakel hired a new attorney and requested a retrial in Connecticut court, proposing a new theory regarding Martha Moxley's murder. His defense team presented evidence implying that Gitano Tony Bryant, cousin of Los Angeles Lakers player Kobe Bryant and former classmate of Michael at Brunswick Private School in Greenwich. In an August 2003 videotaped interview with Vito Colucci, a private investigator hired by Michael, Bryant said that on the night of Moxley's murder, one of his friends had tried to molest her. Bryant said he had not come forward because his mother had warned him that, as a black man, he would be framed for the unsolved murder. A 2-week hearing in April 2007 allowed this oral evidence to be presented, along with other matters. In September 2007, Michael's attorneys filed a motion, based in part on Bryant's complaints, for a new trial. Official prosecutors responded that Bryant may have made up the story to sell a drama about the case. During this period, Michael's defense team appointed several full-time investigators to examine case details, hoping to uncover new evidence that would prove his innocence. Unfortunately, their efforts were hindered when a Supreme Court judge rejected Michael's request for a new trial, stating that Bryant's testimony lacked credibility and that there was no evidence of misconduct by the prosecutors during Michael's initial trial. Michael's attorneys once again appealed this ruling to the Connecticut Supreme Court. In 2009, a panel of 5 judges listened to the appeal, but a year later, on April 12, 2010, they ruled 4-1 against Michael. Despite these challenges, Michael and his legal team remained determined to secure his freedom. In January 2012, they requested a sentence reduction, arguing that he had been an exemplary prisoner and warranted leniency. However, this request was denied, and Michael's sentence continued to stand. In 2013, Michael Skakel appealed his conviction, claiming that his trial attorney, Michael Sherman, had not provided effective representation. During the hearing, Michael Skakel accused Sherman of lacking interest in his defense and being more focused on collecting fees to resolve his financial issues. This raised serious doubts about the fairness of his trial and the potential for a wrongful conviction. As a result, Michael was granted a new trial after it was determined that Sherman had not adequately defended him during his 2002 trial. On November 21, 2013, Michael Skakel was released on $1.2 million bail with other conditions. He must be monitored with a GPS device, have no contact with the Moxley family, must be checked in periodically by phone, and will not be allowed to leave the state of Connecticut unless permission is granted, although he later moved to Westchester County, New York. In December 2016, the Connecticut Supreme Court reinstated Michael's murder conviction in a 4-3 majority decision, writing that his conviction was the result of overwhelming evidence presented by prosecutors and that his legal representation was adequate. In January 2018, prosecutors asked the Connecticut Supreme Court to revoke Michael's bail and return him to prison to continue serving his sentence. However, on May 4, the Connecticut Supreme Court vacated Skakel's conviction and ordered a new trial. The court ruled that Sherman had provided ineffective assistance when he failed to contact an alibi witness named by Michael and that Michael had therefore been deprived of a fair trial. State prosecutors in Stamford have the right to seek a new trial for Michael. This ruling surprised many in the legal community and rekindled questions about the true circumstances of the crime. Despite the possibility of a new trial, in October 2020, the chief state attorney informed the Supreme Court that they would not retry Michael Skakel for Martha's murder. This decision came after a thorough review of the evidence. This decision marked the end of a lengthy legal battle that spanned decades and left many unanswered questions about the murder of Martha Moxley. In 2023, Michael Skakel filed lawsuits against the police investigator in Greenwich. The lawsuits alleged malicious prosecution and violations of constitutional rights. According to Michael's attorney, the fact that Michael spent over 11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit meant he could never be compensated for that lost time. Michael's lawsuits claimed that the lead investigator did not perform their duties properly, acted unethically, and intimidated witnesses during interviews, alleged that the investigator threatened witnesses to make them give false statements. These accusations raised significant concerns about the integrity of the investigation and the validity of Michael Skakel's conviction. Furthermore, the lawsuits argued that the investigator sought to profit from Michael's case, indicating that they were working on a book and film about Michael's supposed involvement in Martha's murder while continuing the investigation. Martha's brother, John, was shocked by the news of Michael's freedom and struggles to grasp the reasoning behind the court's decision. He is convinced that Michael Skakel is guilty and insists that just because Michael is free, it doesn't mean he is innocent. Instead, it reflects the judge's decisions and legal technicalities. In John's view, Michael Skakel killed his sister, a belief he holds firmly. Even though Michael is no longer in prison, John believes he will always be mentally imprisoned, tormented by his actions for the rest of his life. The Oxygen created a powerful documentary exploring the details of Martha Moxley's murder. The Moxley family chose to be part of the documentary to honor Martha and promote the truth about her case. Over the years, many theories have emerged regarding Martha Moxley's death. One of the key suspects is Michael Skakel. Several motives have been suggested for his alleged involvement, including jealousy and anger. Martha had a close friendship with Michael's brother, Thomas Skakel, which might have fueled Michael's resentment towards her. It has also been speculated that Michael may have seen a meeting between Martha and Thomas that triggered feelings of insecurity. Another suspect is Thomas Skakel himself. One theory proposes that he may have killed Martha out of jealousy or rage, especially since she reportedly rejected his advances. Additionally, their family tutor, Kenneth Littleton, has been considered a possible suspect. Others believe that her murderer was simply someone who happened to be passing by. Proponents of these theories argue that Michael Skakel was an easy target and that the true murderer has not yet been caught. Lindsay Clancy was graduated with a biology degree from Quinnipiac College in 2012. 2 years later, she became a licensed nurse after studying at the Massachusetts General Hospital Institute of Health Professions. Lindsay dedicated her career to helping others as a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, where she quickly became known for her exceptional care and was well liked by her colleagues. Her attention to detail and empathy made her a favorite among patients, many of whom specifically requested her for future deliveries. She had a unique talent for calming anxious parents, guiding them through the labor process. In 2016, Lindsay married Patrick Clancy, a software engineer. A year later, they welcomed their daughter, Cora, who dreamed of becoming both a doctor. In 2019, they had their second child, Dawson, a cheerful, charming boy whose laughter and bright smile could light up any room. In 2022, Lindsay gave birth to Callan, a happy, easygoing child. Lindsay, Patrick, and their children lived in a lovely house in Duxbury, Massachusetts, which they bought for $500,000. The home had all the amenities they desired, with a charming backyard featuring a white picket fence and a playground. To their friends and family, Lindsay and Patrick appeared to have a perfect marriage. They rarely argued, their deep affection for each other was clear, as they frequently said love words throughout the day. They seemed to be the perfect example of a happy couple. Patrick was a devoted father to his 3 kids. Their connection was strong, with Patrick often playing with them in the backyard. For Lindsay, there was nothing more important than being a mother. She found raising her children to be the most rewarding aspect of her life. The walls of their home were decorated with photos of her children, and she frequently shared their pictures on social media. Lindsay often posted heartfelt messages, expressing that she felt like the luckiest mama in the world and was so unbelievably thankful for her family life. Those who knew her recognized her commitment to motherhood, noting that she would leave gatherings early to return to her children. She deeply disliked hearing them cry, even during sleep training. After the births of Cora and Dawson, Lindsay found herself overwhelmed by her emotions. The challenges of motherhood felt heavy, and she struggled to manage the complexities it brought. However, she shared on Facebook that her experience with motherhood this time around, with Callan, felt easier. She focused on exercise, nutrition, and rest to improve her emotional well-being. As time passed, Lindsay began to feel anxious about returning to work after her maternity leave. Balancing full-time motherhood with her career started to feel too much for her. In search of support, she turned to various therapies and tried different medications. By September 2022, her anxiety reached its peak, prompting her to seek additional help with an evaluation at the Women and Infant Center for Women's Behavioral Health in Providence. She was not diagnosed with postpartum depression during this visit. On January 1, 2023, Lindsay told her husband that she was having thoughts of hurting herself and their children. Worried for her safety, Lindsay chose to seek help and admitted herself to a hospital for mental health treatment. She spent the next 5 days in McLean Hospital receiving essential care. Upon her discharge, doctors concluded that she was not a danger to herself or others. However, the depth of her struggles remained hidden. Throughout January, Lindsay seemed to improve. Her family enjoyed outings to museums and restaurants. She claimed she no longer had thoughts of self-harm. Even her mother noted a positive shift in her text messages, which sounded more cheerful. Yet, beneath this positive facade, Lindsay was still fighting her internal battles. On January 24, 2023, everything changed for the Clancy family. That day, Lindsay's hidden thoughts and feelings were revealed in a heartbreaking way. It started as a typical day. Lindsay took her children to the doctor for a checkup, as her daughter Cora had a routine appointment with the pediatrician. After returning home, Lindsay spent a lovely afternoon playing in the snow with her kids. She took some photos to capture these moments and shared them with her husband and her mother. Patrick was working from home in the basement. Around 4 p.m., after Lindsay and the children came inside from playing in the snow, Lindsay searched for ways to kill people on her phone and sent Patrick to get takeaway food from a restaurant further away than usual. Lindsay said she suffered a psychotic moment after hallucinating and hearing a voice telling her to kill herself and kill the children. At 5:10 p.m., Lindsay called the restaurant to place their order and mentioned that Patrick would pick it up. Patrick left the house at 5:15 p.m. At 5:34 p.m., Lindsay returned Patrick's call, and their conversation lasted 14 minutes. While everything seemed fine during the call, Patrick felt that Lindsay was busy with something else while they spoke. It was a chilly evening when Patrick arrived home at 6 p.m. after picking up dinner. As he parked in his driveway and entered the house, he was struck by an unsettling silence. The normally lively home felt eerily quiet without the familiar sounds of his wife, Lindsay, and their 3 children. Increasingly anxious, Patrick searched the house for any sign of them. When he found no one, his heart raced with worry. He called Lindsay's cell phone at 6:09 p.m., hoping to hear her voice, but there was no answer. Concerned and anxious, Patrick climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. The silence was overwhelming, with each of his steps echoing in the empty house. When he reached the door, he saw it was locked, which troubled him since Lindsay had never locked herself in before. He turned the doorknob, but it wouldn't open. He tried pulling harder, but the lock was unyielding. Anxious to find his wife, Patrick began to bang on the door, hoping for a reply, but all he heard was silence. Frustrated, he kept struggling with the locked door. He finally managed to force it open, only to be confronted with a horrific scene that would haunt him forever. Blood was splattered on the floor and windowsill, a knife lay on Lindsay's bedside table. The horrifying sight sent chills down Patrick's spine as he realized that something terrible had occurred in that room. Patrick rushed to the bloody windowsill and looked outside, where he saw his wife, Lindsay, lying in the backyard. His heart raced with fear as he quickly called 911 and ran down the stairs to her. When Patrick reached Lindsay, he found her lying on her back, covered in blood, with visible slashes on her neck and wrists. Though she was conscious, she barely responded. Overwhelmed with panic, Patrick struggled to understand what had happened. As Patrick's mind whirled with confusion and worries about their 3 young children, he was forced to ask the unthinkable, where were the kids? Lindsay responded, in the basement. Patrick stayed outside with Lindsay until the police and paramedics arrived, he continually speaking with the dispatcher. The dispatcher could hear the worry in Patrick's voice as he described the serious situation and kept close to his wife. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed Lindsay's condition. They worked hard to stabilize her and provide necessary medical care. Meanwhile, Patrick was deeply concerned about their children. While the paramedics focused on Lindsay, he decided to look for his kids but remained on the phone with the dispatcher. Entering their home, he went down the stairs into the basement, where Lindsay had mentioned the children were. As he descended, he called out, hoping for a response, but there was only silence as he reached the bottom. The atmosphere was tense and the silence was oppressive, creating a growing sense of fear. Suddenly, the dispatcher heard a scream on the line, as if he was in danger. He found his 3 children unconscious on the floor. Overcome with panic, Patrick immediately called for help, pleading with his children to wake up and breathe. He shouted so that the police officers outside could hear. Within minutes, the officers came down and were met with a horrifying scene. 3 innocent children lay unresponsive on the cold floor. Authorities confirmed that they seemed to be strangled. Amidst the chaos, Patrick exclaimed, "She killed the kids," referring to Lindsay. Cora, just 5 years old, and Dawson, only 3, were pronounced dead at the scene. Baby Callan, merely 8 months old, was alive but gravely injured. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, Callan passed away several days later in the hospital, with Patrick holding him in his arms as he took his last breaths. Patrick wrote that his youngest son, Callan, died with great courage despite his young age. Perhaps it was his son's way of demonstrating what he needed to do to move forward. He will always try to be inspired by him. Callan will always be his little hero. In under 20 minutes, a series of tragic events turned Patrick's life upside down, leaving him heartbroken. Meanwhile, Lindsay was taken to the hospital to treat her injuries after jumping out of a window and falling 20 feet in an attempt to end her life. She was hospitalized under police guard, faces 2 counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation or suffocation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, officials said. Days after the tragedy, Patrick Clancy shared his thoughts. Despite enduring unimaginable sorrow, he spoke with love and forgiveness toward his wife. Patrick said he was not married to a demon, he married a sick person. He also recalled her self-treatment efforts. However, he acknowledged that the ongoing pain from the situation weighed heavily on his family. The GoFundMe campaign aimed at covering the funeral costs for their children received significant public support. Still, Some contributors voiced concerns that their donations were indirectly supporting Lindsay's legal defense. This sparked debate and raised alarms about how the funds might be used. Lindsay's lawyers later clarified that her legal fees were not covered by the GoFundMe proceeds. Her parents were responsible for those costs. Despite the controversy surrounding the GoFundMe campaign, it successfully raised over $1 million. At this point, the campaign is no longer accepting donations since it has achieved its goal. On February 7, 2023, a brief hearing took place in Plymouth District Court, where a judge approved Lindsay's attorney's request for the police to set aside security protocols at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, where Lindsay was receiving treatment. This request was necessary for a forensic psychiatrist to evaluate Lindsay for symptoms of postpartum depression. Lindsay's lawyers argued that her self-inflicted injuries severely restricted her movement, which meant that she posed no danger to anyone. They also claimed that she was given an excessive amount of prescription medications. The medications mentioned by her attorney included clonazepam, Valium, Ativan, Zoloft, amitriptyline, meropenem, Prozac, mood stabilizers like lamotrigine and cariprazine, as well as buprenorphine, hydroxyzine, and Ambien. In just 4 months, she had been prescribed a total of 13 different medications to treat mood disorders, anxiety, and psychosis. According to her attorneys, one of the consequences of this overmedication was the development of thoughts about suicide, violence. The attorney believed it was essential to have a detailed evaluation by a forensic psychiatrist to assess the severity of her symptoms and the possible risks linked to her medication. The prosecutor from Plymouth County described her actions as extremely atrocious, cruel, countering the defense's claim that her postpartum mental state and the medication she was taking influenced her decision to commit murder. During the court hearings, Lindsay listened quietly from a hospital room, observing everything through a monitor as the case details were presented. A not guilty plea was submitted for Lindsay. When she took the tragic step of murdering her 3 children, it was classified as filicide, the intentional act of killing one's own children. A psychiatrist who specializes in filicide identifies 5 main reasons why a parent might commit such an act. One surprising reason some parents commit filicide is a misguided sense of altruism. They may believe that by ending their child's life, they are protecting them from suffering or preventing a devastating future. This reason is challenging to understand because it contradicts the natural parental instinct to protect and nurture. Another factor that can lead to filicide is acute psychosis. Parents with mental health disorders, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, might experience delusions or hallucinations that distort their perception of reality. They may mistakenly view their children as threats, believing they are acting to save them from harm. Additionally, some parents may feel regret or disappointment about having children. This negative sentiment can grow into frustration or even hatred, driving the parent to consider drastic actions to eliminate the child. Physical abuse can also contribute to filicide. In situations where children are subjected to severe or ongoing abuse, a toxic environment can form, with the parent becoming the perpetrator. In extreme cases, the parent may experience a sense of relief after harming their child, culminating in the devastating act of filicide. Filicide can occur as a form of revenge between spouses. When one parent feels betrayed, abandoned, or abused by the other, they might misplace their anger onto their child. In such cases, harming or even killing their child may be seen as a way to seek revenge or regain control over their partner, reflecting deep despair and frustration. A devastating incident brought attention to the relationship between postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and violent behavior. Lindsay's lawyers claimed that her actions after giving birth were caused by a combination of postpartum psychosis and excessive medication. During the postpartum period, a woman's hormone levels drop rapidly, triggering chemical changes in the brain that can lead to mood swings. While this natural phase can bring about feelings of being overwhelmed, low energy, intrusive thoughts about self-harm or harming the baby, and sleep problems, postpartum psychosis is a much more serious condition that distorts a mother's sense of reality. It affects roughly 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 deliveries and is marked by a sudden and severe loss of mental stability. Symptoms can include delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, extreme mood swings, and confused thinking. During the investigation into the murder of Lindsay Clancy's 3 children, a diary entry from her phone, dated October 25, 2022, was found. This entry, written months before the tragic events, provided troubling insights into her mental state leading up to the incident. In her diary, Lindsay expressed frustration and resentment towards her children, particularly Cora and Dawson. She mentioned feeling resentment because they prevented her from caring for their infant brother, Callan, as she had with her first child. Lindsay noted her discontent when Cora and Dawson returned from preschool, mentioning that their negative moods affected her as well. She described feeling depressed and suggested that her emotional struggles were impacting her children. Moreover, detectives found that just 4 days before the murders, Lindsay searched her phone for "Can you treat a sociopath?" and looked up methods for killing. The revelation that Lindsay harbored resentment towards her children and sought information on how to carry out such a heinous crime was deeply disturbing. During an arraignment in October 2023, the toxicology reports indicated the presence of several medications in Lindsay's system. These reports showed she had been prescribed antidepressants, antipsychotics, sedatives, and an anticonvulsant, all at therapeutic levels. The prosecution aimed to prove that Lindsay had planned the murders in advance and intentionally committed the act of violence. They argued that the medications in her system did not influence her actions, asserting that she had already decided to kill her children. Additionally, the timing and levels of the medication supported their claim that Lindsay acted with clarity and was not impaired by the drugs. In 2024, Patrick Clancy completed the Boston Marathon in honor of his children, raising money for Boston Children's Hospital. Meanwhile, Lindsay, who was on trial for the murder of her children, continued her treatment at Tewksbury Hospital. She is currently reported to be permanently paralyzed. Clancy's trial was originally scheduled for December 1, 2025, but was rescheduled to January 5, 2026, at the request of both parties. Her case has sparked discussions about postpartum mental health and how little is known about it. Addiction can completely dominate a person's mind and will, leading them to engage in disturbing, harmful behaviors. This dependency can stem from various sources, such as alcohol, banned substance, gambling, or even unhealthy relationships, and its impacts can be equally damaging. While some people eventually recognize that they have become trapped by their addictions, many others ignore the problem. Unfortunately, this denial often leads to a worsening situation. The tragic story of Donna Munda and Ghulam Munda is not an isolated case. In 2005, it sent shockwaves through the peaceful town of Hermitage. They was well known and admired by locals, almost like celebrities. Ghulam was a respected physician who owned his clinic, while Donna was exceptionally beautiful and nearly 24 years younger than him. To everyone who knew them, they appeared to have a perfect and successful relationship. However, on a warm day in May, a single gunshot shattered this facade, revealing a much darker reality marked by betrayal, dependency, and greed. Ghulam grew up in the slums of Gujarat, India. From a young age, he faced the harsh realities of poverty and hunger. These tough conditions shaped his strong character, motivated him to escape poverty and create a better life for himself. He worked hard, focused on excellence, and aspiring to become a doctor. After completing high school, Ghulam was accepted into a medical university, where he quickly became one of the top students. His hard work paid off when he was offered an internship at a prestigious clinic in the United States. There, he worked in the urology department and quickly gained a reputation as a promising young specialist with a bright future. After his internship, Ghulam received an attractive job offer and chose to remain in the U.S. He also began applying for U.S. citizenship. By the mid-1970s, he had moved to Hermitage, Pennsylvania, a small town with a population of just over 16,000. There, he opened his own clinic specializing in urological care. His career quickly flourished. Ghulam became a top professional, utilizing advanced technology and the latest equipment in his practice. His clinic gained a reputation as one of the best in the state. He accepted the most difficult and seemingly hopeless cases, attracting patients from both near and far, including overseas. Dr. Ghulam was well respected not only for his medical skills but also for his kindness. He frequently provided free medical care and often paid for expensive medications for patients who couldn't afford them. His compassion was rooted in his own challenging childhood, which motivated him to help others in need. With a prosperous medical practice, Ghulam enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. He purchased an opulent home in a prestigious area and embraced a life filled with enjoyment. He believed in making the most of life and investing in what made him happy, such as gourmet food, traveling, luxury watches, rare collectibles, high-end cars, and spending time with attractive companions. In his 40s, Ghulam was still single when he noticed a young woman named Donna walking down the street and fell for her immediately. Donna was 24 years younger than him. She came from a religious Catholic family and had just graduated from high school when she met him. At first, she was hesitant about his interest, but over time, she accepted his generous gifts and let him pursue her. Donna's family struggled financially and couldn't afford a prestigious college education. When Ghulam found out about her situation, he offered to pay for her tuition because she wanted to work in healthcare. He supported her journey to become a registered nurse and later funded her master's degree in anesthesiology. Donna and her partner's romantic, Ghulam, relationship started several years after their initial meeting. Interestingly, even though they had strong religious values, Donna's parents accepted their relationship. They appreciated the kind, generous doctor who had helped support their daughter's education and overall well-being. Donna later became a highly skilled nurse anesthetist, secured a job at a prominent medical center. Ghulam continued to encourage her ambitions, supported her career advancement. They lived in Ghulam's luxurious home, where he gave Donna to an expensive car, lavish jewelry, and trips to fancy vacation destinations. When Donna turned 30, Ghulam, who was 54 at the time, proposed to her, and she accepted. They celebrated their engagement with an extravagant wedding ceremony that had over 150 guests, including family, friends, and many of Ghulam's business associates. It appeared that they were on their way to a long, happy life together. Initially, everything seemed perfect. Donna and Ghulam gained fame as local celebrities and were probably the richest people in their town. They enjoyed a luxurious life, traveling frequently, and the doctor generously indulged his much younger wife. They frequently attended charity galas and was always spotted together at public events. Donna chose to prioritize her career and took her time before starting a family. Ghulam supported her decision without any pressure. Many saw Donna as cheerful, friendly, and lively, which was the image she projected, until tragedy struck, started to turn her life upside down. At 37 years old, Donna lost her father after a long illness, which hit her hard. She had always had a close bond with him, referring to herself as a daddy's girl and seeing him as her main source of strength. After he died, Donna became deeply depressed. She isolated herself from others. Ghulam did his best to support her, fulfilling all her wishes, including a trip to Hawaii to help her feel better. However, nothing seemed to work except for antidepressants, which she started taking in larger doses. Donna immersed herself in work, hoping to find solace in her daily routine, but it didn't truly alleviate her suffering. A few years later, she was diagnosed with a kidney condition that caused intense back pain. Even though her husband was a well-known urologist, he couldn't fully relieve her discomfort. The treatments only offered temporary relief, and her symptoms kept coming back, often worse than before. In her desperation, Donna started to rely heavily on strong pain medication. She began secretly taking doses from her workplace, where she was responsible for managing and administering medications. This made it easy for her to take small amounts without being noticed. She would quietly use portions meant for patients, just enough so that no one would realize. Together with her antidepressants, the prescription painkillers dulled her physical and emotional pain. Donna felt abandoned by the world and overwhelmed by her struggles. As a result, she began to distance herself from Ghulam, even though he genuinely cared for her. Things quickly deteriorated. She became increasingly dependent on her medications, to the point where she could not function without them. This led her to raise her dosages and steal more often. Eventually, her behavior attracted attention. She was caught in the act, and there was no way to deny it. Her dismissal from the clinic was shocking, and she faced multiple criminal charges. Ghulam quickly intervened to defend his wife, managed the situation to safeguard her reputation. Thanks to his actions, their friends and family never learned about Donna's problem. Rather than facing jail time, she paid a hefty fine and committed to rehabilitation at a specialized center. Ghulam chose the facility himself and organized Donna's stay, informing relatives, neighbors, and friends that she was on vacation. No one doubted him. He stayed calm, convincing, continued to appear cheerful and friendly. At the rehab center, Donna, who is now in her 40s, met a younger man named Damien Bradford, who was 23 years old. Damien had a history of multiple offenses for distributing illegal substances and ended up in rehab after a serious overdose that almost killed him. Despite their age difference, Donna and Damien quickly became very close, spent a lot of time together. They faced similar challenges. Although their relationship was unexpected, their bond deepened rapidly. What started as simple conversations turned into a passionate affair. Donna's husband was nearing 70 years old. Due to his age and health problems, their physical relationship had significantly diminished. In contrast, Damien was young, energetic, fit, and undeniably attractive. He dedicated a lot of time to the gym, often used steroids and various supplements to maintain his physique. It's unclear why Damien was attracted to a woman 2 decades his senior, but for Donna, he felt like a breath of fresh air, rekindling emotions she thought were long gone. She fully embraced this connection, quickly became emotionally invested. Even though the rehabilitation center had strict rules prohibiting romantic relationships among patients, the two secretly began dating. They found secluded spots to meet, such as storage rooms and restrooms. The thrill of being caught only seemed to strengthen their connection. Donna became so invested in the relationship that she couldn't envision her life without him. Their romance continued after they left the rehab facility. Damien was a caring partner who gave Donna plenty of attention, called her sweet names, and truly enjoyed making her feel valued. He may have developed genuine feelings for Donna, a sophisticated and self-assured woman who clearly looked after herself. At this point, Donna was not working anymore but had complete access to her husband's bank accounts and could spend as she pleased. Ghulam never scrutinized her spending or asked about her expenses. Taking advantage of this, Donna started showering Damien with lavish gifts, designer clothes, and accessories, while also covering all of his living expenses. She even rented a cozy apartment for them to meet privately. As a result, Damien became financially dependent on his wealthy partner, but neither of them appeared to have any concerns about it. When warned about his wife's affair, Ghulam had long suspected that something was off and noticed changes in Donna's behavior, but he had decided not to confront her about it. He realized that she was much younger and had emotional and physical needs that he could no longer fulfill. Gradually, he accepted that their passion had faded. Instead of reacting angrily, he calmly asked Donna if they should consider ending their relationship. Donna was shocked to learn that Ghulam knew about her affair. She explained that it was merely a temporary distraction that happened during a tough period in her life. She had met the younger man while in rehab, when she was feeling vulnerable and needed support. He seemed to understand her struggles better than anyone else. Despite this, she assured Ghulam that he was still the person she loved, promised to end her relationship with the younger man, emphasizing that he didn't truly matter to her. Ghulam felt moved by her words. He chose to trust her, forgave her, and decided they could move forward together as if nothing had happened. Damien had become Donna's overwhelming dependency, which she couldn't easily escape. She felt a strong attraction to him and, in his presence, experienced feelings of youth, desire, and genuine care. Her thoughts were focused on one main goal: eliminating the obstacle to her happiness, her husband. The affair continued at the apartment she had rented for Damien. Although they were more cautious now, Ghulam believed their relationship was over, while Donna planned to maintain it. When they couldn't meet in person, they stayed in constant contact, calling up to 20 times a day and exchanging hundreds of messages. Donna had no plans to let go of her boyfriend. Donna had selfish reasons for not wanting a divorce. She feared losing her financial stability. Before marrying Ghulam, they signed a prenuptial agreement that would limit her settlement to $250,000 if they separated. However, after Ghulam found out about her infidelity, he tried to keep the situation under control and offered to raise her settlement to $1 million. Donna turned down the offer, persuading Ghulam that she still loved him and wished to save their marriage. In reality, though, Ghulam's wealth had increased to nearly $12 million. Motivated by greed, Donna wanted everything, immediate access to wealth so she and Damien could live the way they wanted without restrictions. Every time they met, Donna portrayed Ghulam as a controlling tyrant who emotionally suffocated her and treated her like an object. She wanted Damien to see her husband as an enemy who deserved revenge for the emotional pain he supposedly caused her. Her manipulative stories worked well. A dark plan began to form in Donna's troubled mind, one she intended to execute with the help of her young lover. She believed that since Ghulam was much older and had several chronic health issues, his time was running out anyway. So, she thought, why not hasten the inevitable? To Donna, this seemed like the ideal solution. No one would disrupt her new life, and she would legally inherit all of Ghulam's assets, properties, and wealth as his surviving spouse. She shared her plan with Damien, offering him half of Ghulam's fortune in exchange for his help with a problem. Damien quickly agreed. The promise of a large payout clouded his judgment. Together, they began devising the crime. People who knew Ghulam were aware that he often carried a large amount of cash in his wallet. He frequently joked that anyone who tried to rob him would leave satisfied. Donna and Damien decided to exploit this, planning the crime to appear as a failed mugging that escalated into a tragic event. Developing the plan took nearly 2 months, as Donna and her accomplice carefully considered every detail to avoid mistakes. During this time, Donna portrayed the perfect devoted wife. She stayed close to her husband, accompanied him everywhere, and made sure no one suspected any issues in their marriage. Friends and neighbors genuinely thought they were a happy couple, and even Ghulam was convinced of it. Their initial attempt to execute the plan did not go well. Damien was meant to ambush Ghulam as he left the hospital and headed to his car in the parking lot. However, the area was crowded with people, prompting Damien to back out due to the fear of too many witnesses. It took them another month to devise a new strategy. This time, they aimed to attack on a deserted road where no one would be present to intervene. The plan was straightforward. Damien would follow their car at a safe distance, and Donna would stop at a designated location, pretending there was a medical emergency. They set the date for Friday, May 13, 2005. On that day, Dr. Ghulam planned to visit a neighboring state to look at a house he wanted to buy as a wedding gift for his nephew, Farouk Munda. Donna offered to go with him, but her 72-year-old mother, Dorothy Smouse, who was visiting at the time, insisted on joining. Donna tried to talk her out of it, but Ghulam didn't see any issue with her coming along and agreed to let his mother-in-law participate. Damien, dressed entirely in black and wearing ski goggles to conceal his identity, waited in his car for a message from Donna indicating that their vehicle had left the house. Once he received the signal, he followed the predetermined route, maintaining a safe distance behind. After stopping to refuel, Donna took over driving to keep control over their timing. While traveling along a deserted highway, she pretended to feel ill and pulled over, claiming she needed to take some medication. At that moment, a black Volkswagen approached from behind. A man in ski goggles jumped out, ran to the passenger side where Ghulam was sitting, pointed a gun at him, and demanded his wallet. Ghulam complied without resistance, handed over his wallet. However, as soon as the attacker received the money, he shot Ghulam in the head and quickly returned to his vehicle, driving away rapidly. Ghulam died instantly from the gunshot. Donna then called emergency services, crying and screaming as she begged them to save her husband. She acted so convincingly like a distraught widow that, at first, no one suspected she could have been involved in the incident. Inconsistencies in the testimonies appeared quickly. Right from the initial interviews, it was evident that something was not right. Donna stated she didn't see the attacker or his vehicle, everything happened too quickly, and she was in shock. In contrast, her mother provided a different account. She claimed she saw both the shooter and the car clearly. According to her, the person who shot her son-in-law was a young black man driving a black Volkswagen. This assertion visibly upset Donna, who argued with her mother, insisting that she must have been mistaken. However, her mother remained firm and began to add more specific details. Donna contended that they had stopped the car because Ghulam requested it, while her mother claimed it was Donna who stopped the car, as illness. Investigators were also puzzled as to why the assailant only targeted one person while leaving two possible witnesses unharmed. 2 days after the incident, Dr. Ghulam's widow held a press conference where she answered reporters' questions with tears in her eyes. She made a heartfelt appeal to the public, urging anyone with information about the case to come forward and help with the investigation. Shortly after the press conference, the police received a phone call from a woman who claimed that Donna was actually the mastermind behind the incident and that she had been assisted by her lover, Damian Bradford. The caller also provided details such as the make and license plate number of Damian's car, as well as his home address. This caller considered herself to be Damian's fiancée. She had been closely monitoring the couple and shared all the information she had gathered. On the same day, police arrested Damian and searched his apartment. Although he had managed to get rid of the weapon, for some unknown reason, he kept the victim's wallet and brought it home. Inside the wallet, they found about $3,000 in cash, several bank cards belonging to Dr. Ghulam, and a photo of Donna. Authorities also discovered clothes with small blood stains that matched the doctor's. Damian was arrested and taken into custody. He mistakenly believed that his wealthy lover would help him and somehow secure his release. However, Donna, fearing for her own safety, chose to stay silent, hoping that all the blame would fall on Damian, especially since the evidence against him was overwhelming. When prosecutors told Damian that he might face the death penalty, he decided to cooperate with them in exchange for a shorter sentence. He disclosed the entire plan, provided text messages and documents, including evidence that Donna had purchased the car he was driving. In July 2007, Damian pleaded guilty to the crime and testified in court, explaining all the details of the scheme. Because he cooperated, he was sentenced to 17.5 years in prison. Donna was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on September 21, 2007, for the murder for hire conviction, with an additional 360 months to run concurrently on the remaining charges. Despite Donna's numerous appeals, the court upheld the original sentence. She is currently serving her sentence at the Tallahassee Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee, Florida. After being released on supervised release in 2020, Damian Bradford was arrested again on July 29, 2022, following an altercation with state police at the Franklin Mini Mart in Aliquippa. During his struggle with an officer, Bradford fired a shot at the officer, hitting him in the leg. Damian was convicted of attempted murder and aggravated assault on the officer, sentenced to 36.5 to 73 years in state prison in November 2023. In December of that year, the district court added a consecutive 10-year sentence for violating the terms of his supervised release. As of press time, Damian is serving his sentence at the Albion State Correctional Institution, located in Albion, Pennsylvania. The murder of Dr. Ghulam Munda on May 13, 2005, shattered the illusion of a perfect life in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, exposing a chilling tale of addiction and betrayal. Donna Munda, 23 years younger than her devoted husband, succumbed to a dependency on painkillers and an obsessive affair with Damian Bradford, leading her to orchestrate Ghulam's death for his $12 million estate. Ghulam's kindness and medical legacy endure in the community's memory, marked by tributes in 2025, while his tragic end serves as a stark warning of addiction's power to corrupt and destroy, urging greater vigilance to prevent such devastations.